Good morning, colleagues. Welcome to this meeting of Full Council of Cambridgeshire County Council. I would like to welcome members of the public to this meeting of the Council, particularly those watching the live stream on the Council's YouTube channel. As you know, this Council supports the principle of transparency and encourages filming, recording and taking photographs at its meetings that are open to the public. Members are advised that this meeting may therefore be filmed, recorded or photographed. Please, can I ask all members to turn their mobile phones to silent or vibrate, whichever your preference is, whilst the meeting is taking place. There is no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, I will adjourn the meeting very quickly and we will all make our way downstairs via the fire escape in the corridor behind you. The muster point is at the far end of the building. Apologies for absence. I've received apologies from Councillor Matt Maguire, Councillor Mandy Smith, Councillor Maria King. Do I have any other apologies? No, thank you very much. We move on then to the next item on the agenda, which is the approval of the minutes of the meeting of the Council held on the 16th of May 2023. Council is asked to agree these as a correct record. If any member does not agree, would you raise your hand now, please? There being no hands raised, I move on to discuss the updated motions log, which is also included in the published papers for this meeting for your information in order to report on progress. Whilst I will not be reopening the debate on any motion in the motions log, I will take questions and comments. If you wish to pursue actions further, you will need to contact the allocated officer out of this meeting. Anyone? Splendid. I move on in that case to announcements, and I have several announcements to make today. It is with very deep regret that I report the recent death of Catriona Taylor. Cat worked in the IT and digital services team. The Council's thoughts are with her family, friends and colleagues at this very sad time. May I ask Council please to stand in memory of Cat. Thank you, colleagues. I am delighted to report that the Council's Prevention and Early Intervention Enhanced Response Team have received a Silver Award for their work supporting the NHS's Emergency Care Improvement Support Initiative. This initiative aims to prevent deconditioning by encouraging all sectors in health and social care settings to come up with innovative and fun ways to promote physical activity and well-being, where it is hoped these will reduce deconditioning and associated harms, improve hospital discharges and patient outcomes. I'm also delighted to report that the Council's Searches team have achieved a Platinum Award at the GeoPlace Conference and Awards in May for the consistent high quality of its highways network information, street and address data, which I expect we've all been using quite a lot over the last 4 or 5 months. As Chair of Council, I attended the following events: the USAF 501st Combat Support Wing exercising the Freedom of the Town parade in Huntingdon, the 80th Anniversary Memorial at Newshire Hall, Memorial Day ceremony at Cambridge American Cemetery at Madingley, welcoming Her Majesty Queen Camilla to the British Racing School, the civic service for the installation of the Mayor at Peterborough Cathedral, Armed Forces Day flag raising and Pride Month flag raising at Newshire Hall, the proclamation of Midsummer Fair in Cambridge, the conferment of honorary degrees at the Senate House, the High Sheriff's summer reception at Wisbech, the Bishop of Ely's garden party, unsurprisingly at Ely, and the civic service for West Northamptonshire Council and reception at the Guildhall Courtyard in Northampton. Together with the Vice Chair, I attended the congregation for the formal admission to office of Professor Deborah Prentice as the 347th Vice Chancellor of the University of Cambridge. The Vice Chair, on my behalf, attended the Civic Leaders Open Day and the 100th Air Refuelling Wing Change of Command at RAF Mildenhall. And our Chair Emeritus, Councillor Ferguson, attended the Red Balloon of the Air Peterborough Student Hub Open event on our behalf. Thank you very much. That concludes the announcements for today. Next on the agenda is an item on declarations of interests. Under this item, members are asked to declare interests under the Code of Conduct in any item on the agenda for today's meeting if they are not registered on the members' register of interests already. In relation to item 10C, school uniform costs, the monitoring officer has advised that because there are a number of members who may be governors or trustees of schools, there is no need to declare an interest now if you have already included it on your register of interests. May I have any declarations of interest now, please? Councillor Machini.
I am unsure whether it's on my register of interest or not. I am a governor of King's Edges Primary School.
Thank you for that. The monitoring officer will speak to you afterwards. Any other declarations of interest? Thank you. We now move on to the next item, which is public question time. The Council has received notice of 2 questions, the content of which has been circulated electronically to all members and published on the Council's website. May I invite Fenland District Councillor Chris Seaton to come forward and ask his question. Councillor Seaton, you're very welcome. Thank you very much for coming along this morning to ask your question. As you know, you have 2 minutes. If you press the speaker icon in front of you, you should come up on the microphone. And when you're ready, if you'd like to start. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning and good morning, members. And can I thank you for allowing me this opportunity to ask this question this morning. The question is to the Chair of the Highways and Transportation Committee. And the question is, what action will Cambridgeshire County Council take to rectify the appalling state of road markings, such as single and double yellow lines, and on-street parking restriction signs in Fenland, where a recent report by the County Council's contractor indicated that more than 90% of signs and markings are no longer legally compliant and are therefore not legally enforceable? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Beckett, you have 2 minutes to respond.
Thank you very much, Councillor Seaton, and thank you for coming here to ask your question today. It is something that I'm sure is a great concern to many people across the county. Obviously, we're all aware of the constrained funding environment of which the County Council exists within. The British Asphalt Association currently reckons it's about £11 billion across the country to put our roads up to the state of repair that we would all like. We've obviously seen 30% inflation within highways over the last year due to the trust budget and other things. And the government puts 31 times as much funding into repairing national highways roads as it does into our own. Obviously, within our own budgets, about 80% of our budget goes into adult social care, children and young people's. And that leaves us with a very modest revenue budget for highways. We've also seen our highways budget lack the amount of investment it needs over many years, over many previous administrations. And that has led to some very difficult decisions within the highways department. As part of that, previous administrations and ours have continued to focus on safety as a top priority as to where our budget goes. So therefore, that means that we do spend our most resources on making sure safety lines are corrected and repainted. We make sure that any safety critical potholes are repaired fast. I think everyone will agree that safety needs to be the top priority of this council. And so that's where the majority of our investment goes. As a slight case The report that you're referring to is regards to civil parking enforcement, the 90%. It's not the case that that means that those lines aren't enforceable. They are still currently enforceable by the police in their current state. It's just for us to be able to apply for civil parking enforcement, it requires a higher barrier to entry on that one. So we are doing everything we can, but obviously we do live in a very constrained funding environment, and Highways has lacked over many decades the funding that it needs for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Beckett. Councillor Seaton, you have a minute if you would like to ask any supplementary question.
Thank you, Chairman. And obviously, you know, I recognise some of the comments that have been made by Councillor Bennett. But my supplementary would be the police already have parking enforcement very low on their list of priorities, as almost none of the County Council on-street parking restriction signs and road markings are legal in Fenland or Huntingdonshire. What little police enforcement there currently is will cease entirely. And by law, is not this the County Council's responsibility as the Highways Authority, and also to provide the duty of care to the residents of Cambridgeshire? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Seaton. Councillor Beckett, you have 2 minutes to respond.
Thank you, Chair. So across the county, we see issues with the police enforcing our parking restrictions. Within the city of Cambridgeshire, we currently have civil parking enforcement, where we have parking enforcement operatives that will go out and enforce those. And we do see higher levels of enforcement action within Cambridge. Due to the levels seen in Cambridge, many of the other districts have been requesting civil parking enforcement, and we are looking at rolling it out to other areas. South Cambs, for instance, is in the latter stages of civil parking enforcement applications, and they will be rolling that out very soon. Fenland is one of the other areas that is currently investigating civil parking enforcement, and the County Council and the Combined Authority are putting about 150,000 into helping Fenland with their ambition for civil parking enforcement. That will obviously take the burden off the police and allow parking wardens to be able to actually do the work within Fenland. Where this report comes from is a lot of that work in getting ready for that and making sure that we can get the parking enforcement we need across the county.
Thank you, Councillor Beckett. Councillor Seaton, thank you very much for coming along this morning, and the responses to your questions obviously will be in the minutes of our proceedings today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman.
We move on now to the next public question, and joining us via Zoom is Dr. Sarah Lightowlers. Dr. Lightowlers, thank you very much for joining us this morning. If you would like to proceed with your question when you're ready.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Lightowlers, and I've been a doctor in the NHS for 13 years. I'm now an oncologist and cancer researcher. I also have 2 children, the older of whom is starting school in Cambridge this September. But I'm worried for the future for my children. The climate and ecological emergencies threaten our security, and meanwhile, the UK is becoming a more difficult and less healthy place to live. Our food system is at the centre of 3 global crises: health, climate, and ecology. Globally, around 1 million cancer deaths per year are due to a poor quality diet. Cancer Research UK states that healthier diets could prevent 50 new cancer cases per day in the UK, yet the public are unaware of the extent of the impact of diet and lifestyle factors on cancer risk, with less than half knowing that processed red meat is a direct cause of cancer and that fruit and vegetables are protective. Poor diet starts from an early age. Almost a third of primary school age children eat less than 1 portion of vegetables per day, predisposing them to health problems in future. The science is also clear that meat and dairy are major contributors to the climate and ecological emergencies. In the UK, the food system contributes 19% of human-made greenhouse gas emissions. The biggest part of this is due to nitrous oxide and methane emissions from livestock. There have been substantial evidence-based recommendations calling for a move away from meat and dairy, with the National Food Strategy concluding that public organisations need to lead the way. So councils around the UK are taking action to promote the benefits of healthy plant-based eating and help normalise it. Some councils have committed to ensure that any food and drink provided at council meetings and events will be plant-based. Waltham Forest Council worked with their school catering provider to launch a new eco-friendly and nutritious menu, which has won national awards. Other councils are increasing, improving and promoting the plant-based options on menus at leisure centres, care homes and cafes and parks and libraries over which they have influence. Oxford City Council is working with local organisations to establish a plant-based free food service, tackling the climate crisis and food poverty in one. It is also working with local farmers to support the production of more local plant-based produce. London boroughs have used social media to promote the health, environmental and cost benefits of eating more plant-based meals. There are many, many ways that as a local authority you can encourage, support and enable people to make healthier, more sustainable food choices. So my question is, what will you do?
Thank you, Dr. Lightowers. Councillor Howitt, I think you are responding as the chair of Adults and Health Committee.
Thank you. Good morning, Dr. Lightowers. Thank you for your question and thank you for being an NHS doctor and for all that you are doing and all your colleagues. I am a parent in Cambridge too, and I share all of your worries for the future of my own children. Cambridgeshire County Council fully accepts your argument that the food system is crucial to meeting the challenges of health and of the environment. I am deeply proud of the work of our public health team to improve health outcomes in the county through healthy eating programmes, working including with my good colleague Councillor Goodliffe on my right, who's responsible for schools and young people on infant feeding strategy, a Healthy Start scheme, which gives support to the promotion of access to vitamins for poorer families, our Healthy Child programme providing advice on healthy eating, our award scheme and consultancy to support healthy schools, our child weight management services, our council summer Get Activated campaign, our holiday activities and food programme, which includes a nutritional meal each day and increasing awareness of healthy eating. And for adults, we offer our integrated healthy lifestyle service, which includes healthy eating workshops and one-to-one advice on adopting a healthier diet. And of course, it's not just public health. With my colleague Councillor Dubray, it's why in our climate policy we encourage local, sustainable and in-season foods which support decarbonisation. With my colleague Councillor Sanderson, our trading standards scheme is vigilant about mislabelling of vegan food, an item that was highlighted by The Guardian recently. So I hope this demonstrates not just what we will do, but what we are doing. Finally, in my time, I acknowledge that the number of vegans in Britain has quadrupled in the last 5 years. There are probably 13,000 people across Cambridgeshire who choose it as their diet. And our Veg Power scheme with 54 schools, it specifically encourages children to eat vegetables. And we specifically work with schools on school food standards, recommending that all children have a meat-free day each week. We can do more, I'm sure, but I hope that shows you our convictions.
Thank you, Councillor Howard. Dr. Lightowers, you now have a minute to ask any supplementary question when you're ready.
Thanks very much, Councillor Howitt. I don't have any further questions.
Dr. Lightowers, thank you very much for coming along this morning, as it were, by Zoom and asking your question, which is very much appreciated. Thank you very much. Colleagues, we now move on to item number 5, which is petitions. This allows members of the public to present petitions in accordance with the agreed protocol. No petitions were received, so we move on to the next item. But before we do proceed with the rest of the agenda, can I remind you about the audio and voting system? In order to register to speak, can you please raise your hand and I or my vice chair will add you to the list of speakers. When I invite you to speak, please press your mic button. If you wish to raise a point of order or a point of personal explanation, first of all, really reflect on whether you need to. You'll need to raise your hand. Do not press any buttons. I'm going to be strict about these. I always say this, never has any impact at all, but I'm going to try and be strict about both the raising of a point of order or a point of personal explanation. Just to remind you, raising a point of order means that the member believes that there's been a breach of the council rules of procedure or law, which I will require the member to indicate the rule or law which he or she considers has been broken. If this belief is challenged, I will be the final arbiter. A point of personal explanation may only relate to some material part of an earlier speech by the member raising the point, which may appear to have been misunderstood in the present debate. Again, I will be the final arbiter. I'd also like to remind members that if a member rises on either of these points, any other member currently speaking needs to shut up. And if they are standing, they need to sit down immediately. So we move on to item number 6. And the first is 6A, which is the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Strategy for determination from Strategy and Resources Committee. Can I ask, please, the chair of the Strategy and Resources Committee, Councillor Netzinger, to move that the recommendation set out on page 2 of the agenda be adopted, and ask the vice chair, Councillor Machini, to second. Councillor Netzinger.
I would like to so move. Thank you.
And duly seconded, Chair.
Do you wish to reserve your right to speak?
I will do so, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Netzinger, did you want to say anything?
I'll speak very briefly on this one because it has been discussed at least, well, 2 of our council's committees already before coming here. Just to say that this is an important part of the council's work and an important strategy for us. It has been quite thoroughly discussed, as was discussed at the strategy and resources meeting. The most important thing about this strategy is not the strategy itself, but its implementation, and we will all need to make sure that we are paying close attention to that. I think that's all I need to say at this point.
Thank you. Councillor Count.
Thank you, Chair. I also will be brief, but I want to refer to some of the conversations. I know Councillor Bowden has some additional information he wants to bring in, but we were disappointed at strategy and resources when this came in front of us, not with the fact that we have an EDI strategy in front of us. In fact, we welcomed that and we said, you know, there's a lot of good work in there. But once again, we was presented with a strategy that actually had no action plan attached and no outcomes that were going to be measured. So during that meeting, I did ask, can we actually have member involvement in them? Because the paperwork just said that they will go off and an action plan will be delivered by officers through an officer group and the outcomes will be measured that way. I'm glad to report, and I'm standing up at this point in time to have this noted in the full council minutes, because despite asking for an amendment on that to ensure that there was some member involvement in the action plan and the outcomes, it was actually done as what we believe would be an action, but it's not recorded as a recommendation because that was turned down on the day. So I'm standing up in full council to ensure that that does go ahead, and I understand that will be the new COSMIC committee or variation of that will be responsible for working alongside officers to bring up an action plan and outcomes. This is not the first one that has come like this. The people strategy, which regards human resources, which is probably the biggest difficulty facing this council since this administration took over, also came to us without an action plan or an outcomes strategy. This is, in my opinion, not good enough, and I'll keep hammering away on the point. Now, at the strategy and resources meeting, we had another policy in front of us on that day, which was the data strategy, and that was an excellent piece of work. We all in the room commended the officer, Sam Smith, who unfortunately is another top senior officer leaving this organisation, on the quality of the work that she brought forward on that day and the fact that it was a fully worked up strategy, including action plan and outcomes. So I do hope that this reminder at full council today of stop bringing half-baked pies to us and wait until they're fully baked. I'm referring back to my lasagna conversation on the day, because it's much better to have these things in front of members so we can analyse it fully and not when they're just half prepared. But I go back to my earlier comments. I do appreciate this EDI strategy and think there's some good work in there and welcome it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Count. Councillor Bowden, did you wish to speak?
Yes, Chair, thank you very much indeed. I have no objection to anything which is contained within this proposal. However, I did express my concern at Strategy and Resources about something which was missed. I believe there's a missed opportunity here. There is a national scandal. This is not local to Cambridgeshire. There is a national scandal at the failure to ensure that those adults with learning disabilities get the opportunity and dignity of work, which very often is extremely therapeutic and extremely helpful to the individuals concerned in a whole host of ways. And this is a national matter, it's not just local here in Cambridgeshire. But this strategy was an opportunity missed, where we could have stated quite clearly our commitment as a council towards those who are neurodiverse and our particular commitment to try to ensure that those adults for whom we have a statutory responsibility and for those young people who are going to become working adults or potentially working adults shortly, that those individuals are helped into work, and particularly that we take the opportunity within our own workforce to help them into work. Now, I give full credit to Councillor Netzinger at the meeting. I think she fully supported what I was saying and the principle of what I was saying. But we and she even tried to manipulate the standing orders to see if we could manage to squeeze this in, and that unfortunately wasn't possible. But nevertheless, it is a missed opportunity, and I think that Councillor Netzinger will agree with me it's been a missed opportunity. And my request is to find out from Councillor Netzinger how she seeks to redress this at some stage in the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bowden. Councillor Howard.
on this last point, I'm sure Councillor Nessinger will speak, but can I be very clear, is that the Strategy and Resources meeting, there's cross-party support on what was raised about learning disabilities. There is an excellent part of this strategy, which is about improving access to our services for all people with disabilities. But I think Councillor Bowden is right to address particularly the employment issues around people with learning disabilities. And I very strongly believe in this council that we should be very honest about our shortcomings as well as our strengths. And I want to acknowledge that our current work in adults and health on learning disabilities and employment has not reached the ambitions that we would have for it. And it's something that should really bring about our attention. I draw to Councillor Bowden's memory that the officer who replied in the Strategy and Resources meeting said this would be agreed and monitored at the COSMIC committee. So there's a very clear agreement already about how this is taken forward. And finally, Chair, to Councillor Camp, I just ask you to reflect whether it's a good idea to keep making your jibes about officers leaving the authority. There is no evidence that the turnover in our authority is higher than any other. And we can see through the calibre of officers that we are attracting to the roles that we have.
Councillor Count, you have a point of order?
Yes.
Or is it a point of personal explanation?
Personal explanation relating to something I said earlier in speech. At no point in time did I say that officers were leaving this council. I may think that on occasion, but I never said that. That's absolutely just making words up now, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Howard, if you'd like to continue, please.
Just very briefly, the comment was in relation to our Chief Digital Officer, who I am desperately pleased has not only been outstanding in our employment, but because of that has been recognised to take on the major national role working for local government in this area. This is not something to be decried. This is something to be celebrated and a great example to all of our staff.
Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Count.
Point of personal explanation, it's my hearing. I heard him say officers leading the authority. I apologise, it was leaving the authority. And yes, Officer Sam Smith's gone on to an excellent new role, but I do maintain that she is one of many that has left this authority since this administration.
Thank you, Councillor
I thank Councillor Count for his generosity, even if we do disagree.
Thank you, Councillor Howard. What a nice moment to end on. Right, I have no other speakers. So, Councillor Machini, you reserved your right to speak, so you're up.
Thank you very much. And absolutely, I would like to reiterate that those comments were aired very thoroughly at SNR. We took them on board, we agreed where it was appropriate to agree. Councillor Count and I did have a nice exchange about lasagna and whether or not they are oven ready. And, it's completely appropriate for us to have those discussions. But let's not forget that the infinite quest for perfection is by definition not achievable. The quest for a perfect strategy will always leave you wanting. The thing that you need to have is you need to have a good strategy in front of you, a working strategy, a living strategy that you can work on. And this is exactly what we've got, and we will continue to improve it as best as we can, because there is always the possibility to do better. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Netzinger.
Thank you. So I had hoped we could have had a slightly briefer rerun of the strategy and resources debate. However, just to respond to the points that have been made again, I think that it was made very clear at Strategy and Resources that one of the reasons why this strategy has come without the action plan is because the action plan will be a better action plan if it is drawn up with our staff and with our partners. And that is the next piece of work that needs to be done for this document. And that action plan will be co-produced with those other groups, and that will be really helpful. On the learning disability point, I really do welcome Councillor Bowden's focus on that. I think his point is very well made, and it will be important that we pick that up. And I continue to be grateful for his focus on that element, and will welcome his scrutiny of us to make sure that we do follow it up at a later point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Netzinger. We now move to the vote. I wonder if there is general consensus. There is general consensus. Councillor Count, perhaps there's general consensus from your side of the chamber. All right, in which case, does anybody disagree Good. We won't take an electronic vote, and so that is agreed. The next item is item 6B, which is the recommendation to full council from the Strategy and Resources Committee relating to the Treasury Management Report, Q4 Update and Annual Report 2022-2023. Can I ask the Chair of the Strategy and Resources Committee, Councillor Netzinger, to move that the recommendations set out on page 3 of the agenda be adopted, and ask the Vice Chair, Councillor Machini, to second?
I so move.
I so second and reserve my right to speak.
Thank you very much. Councillor Netzinger.
I don't feel the need, well, no, I don't feel the need to make any comments on this. We did discuss this also at Strategy and Resources.
Anybody? Councillor Machini.
That's all good, Chair. Thank you. Nothing further.
Councillor Netzinger. Good. That's all very exciting. I hope this continues. So there is general consensus and support of the motion. Does anybody disagree with that? See no objections, so we will take this motion as carried. We next move to item 7, which is recommendations to full council from the Constitution and Ethics Committee and the proposed changes to the Constitution on page 23 of your agenda. Can I ask the Chair of the Constitution and Ethics Committee, Councillor Bird, to move that the recommendations set out in the report be adopted, and as Vice Chair of the committee, I will second. Councillor Bird.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to recommend the recommendations for the Constitution changes. We had a large debate, I'll say large because it was, at the meeting. And these are the recommendations that we've come up with. I won't read out the recommendations, Chair, because everyone should have read the papers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bird. I second the recommendations, and I will be reserving my right to speak. So we have 2 amendments. The first amendment, can I ask Councillor Lorna Dupre to move her amendment? Councillor Dupre.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. I would like to move this amendment, and I believe Councillor Sanderson is going to second it. Sorry. Yeah, I'd like to move this amendment, and I believe Councillor Sanderson is going to second it.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Thank you. Councillor Dupre.
Thank you, Chair. What's in a name? Well, clearly this isn't Romeo and Juliet, but I think Shakespeare's question remains relevant, and there is still a lot in this name. And I believe that the name of the committee that is currently known as COSMIC should remain as the Community's Social Mobility and Inclusion Committee. When we considered the committee structure, when we were establishing the joint administration in 2021, we wanted the name of this committee to reflect the council's role in helping to support and sustain communities in Cambridgeshire. But we also wanted to bring to the forefront the committee's remit for equality, diversity and inclusion, a matter we've been discussing already this morning. The phrase social mobility was suggested to cover part of that, and the word inclusion also. And those were the words that formed the new committee title. I will be the first to admit that it's not the most mellifluous name for a committee, and I take full responsibility for the way in which it became known as COSMIC. I came up with the acronym about a fortnight, I think, after we had established the new committee, purely so that I could remember which order the various components of the word salad came in. And that's why it became known as COSMIC and why it's known as COSMIC to this day. However, the acronym is the least important part of this. The important part of this is that the title of the committee should, in the view of the joint administration, reflect the remit and the matters that are most important within its remit. We believe that the title Communities Committee does not do that, and we believe that the title, which we first alighted on, Community Social Mobility and Inclusion Committee, does do that job. We don't want the committee's equality, diversity and inclusion remit to be airbrushed out in a change of title. So here we are, and I rise to move the momentous decision to retain the committee's existing title. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dupre. Anybody else? Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you very much, Chair. I endorse Councillor Dupre's comments. We certainly don't want to see the equalities, diversity, inclusion elements of the committee to be airbrushed out of the title. I think the acronym COSMIC is actually quite good. It's quite jolly, which is what our committee is all about, of course. And we do actually, I think, work very well together across party lines. So I'm very happy to support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dupre, do you have anything to add as the mover of the amendment?
I think everything that needs to be said has been said, Chair. Thank you.
Given that there has been no member speaking against this amendment, can I take it by assent? Or would you prefer an electronic vote? Okay. Does anybody disagree with that? In which case the amendment is carried and becomes part of the substantive motion. So we move on in that case to the second amendment. Can I ask Councillor Steve Count to move his amendment? Councillor Count.
Thank you, Chair. I'll move and speak to that if I may. It's amazing because we've just had 5 minutes on a name change, shuffling chairs as the Titanic fails is what I believe. Yeah, there's no reason to object to that. If that is the most important thing out the governance review that the administration could find, so be it. But I'm going to actually take a different tack. There was a recommendation from the governance review that the problems with the scrutiny in the Adults and Health Committee be dealt with in a certain way. And their recommendation cannot go forward because public health functions cannot be delegated in the way that was suggested. This has led to the papers actually saying do nothing instead. And rather than do nothing, I've put forward this helpful recommendation. I believe it to be helpful on behalf of our group to say, actually, the recommendation from the governance review doesn't work. There are holes in the governance and the scrutiny that are identified. Therefore, if we can't do what's suggested, we could either come up with an amendment on our own and say something like create a new committee, or we could say, let's ask officers to assist us and bring something back to the Constitution and Ethics Committee for the CNE committee to discuss. Now, as we know, the administration has the majority vote here. They also have the majority vote at the Constitution and Ethics Committee, and any changes to the Constitution would come back here. So it's very much a decision for the administration to make how to move forward instead of leaving the hole. But I did ask for support from all of the 3 party leaders. I'm sad to say I didn't get a seconder from them, so I'm not sure how they'll vote. But I would rather that they would endorse this because it's not a policy change on our behalf. We're not asking you to do anything except for to cover a void. And I want to go on to describe what's in the actual governance papers to tell us what that void is. So that committee, I'm quoting here, results in very lengthy agendas that struggle to do justice to the importance of issues under the committee's purview. It's important to note that the decision to join these 2 functions was not necessarily an error at the start. Fair enough. It could have worked, and it does in other councils, but importantly, the model is not right for Cambridgeshire. That last comment is because of the myriad of other setups around it and our calendar, etc. So it could work in certain circumstances. Quote, as things stand, the committee does not have the capacity to embark on meaningful health scrutiny activities. The direct quote. Another quote, the council needs a way to properly highlight and act on public health issues. Now these feel buried within the weight of other work. There was a suggestion that we go back to the old system of Adults and Health Committee to 2 different committees. This was rejected by the governance review, but it was rejected on the basis of there is not the appetite on the part of the many members for such a change. For clarity, they interviewed 19 members, 17 members were against that view, 2 were for, the 2 that were for were the 2 Conservative members that were interviewed, and the 17 that didn't. So there's no point me coming back here and saying we want another committee to handle this correctly, because we already know the administration won't go down that route. But there are many, many other options that you could pursue that officers could help you with to actually deliver better scrutiny in the health functions. And again, from the governance review, quoting, We consider that the need to integrate public health into wider health system decision-making are such that the organisations of these meetings should be replanned to provide for public health matters to be considered by the Health and Wellbeing Board. So there is a lot in this government review that are very, very specific to this committee and the way that the committee's not worked. There was credit given, and I'll join in with the credit, that Councillor Howard have made some changes to try and improve things at the start. This was the splitting up of the morning and afternoon sessions. And at the very beginning, we said from our side, this is not working. There was reaction, there were some improvements. But it is clear from the governance review that this council is failing, will continue to fail in that area unless something happens. And the option to do nothing, which is covered in the council papers, is not a suitable option. What we should do, I leave it up to you. If you approve this amendment, you will get a chance, an opportunity and time to work with officers to look at other ways you could handle this gap that is so obvious that the governance review highlighted it and put forward a recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kent. Do you have a seconder?
Happy to second and reserve my right to speak.
Thank you, Councillor Bowden. Councillor Howard, I think you're probably next.
I hope this might be my last intervention because I've done a few too many. As the governance review is very clear, this is how other what we're doing is how other county councils operate. I respectfully, and this administration respectfully disagrees that we can't do here what other county councils are doing. And we respectfully point the Conservatives to the policies of their own government towards integration of health and social care, which would make the sort of change that they have posited today and in the past totally counter to current thinking. I would also say to them and to all members of this council, the reports that we've produced on dentistry and lack of access to dentistry, on access to GPs and those difficulties, on the very strong challenges in the East of England ambulance service that operates in Cambridgeshire, have been outstanding examples of health scrutiny by this authority and shouldn't be talked down. The difference and why we can't support the amendment is that we've made changes in the year since the governance review team were here, specifically to deal with the challenges that they identify in their report. So we've brought in an extra staff member from Democratic Services to support the work. We've started pre-meetings of members of the committee in order to specifically prepare the questions. And we are undertaking training on health scrutiny, drawing on the experiences of other authorities for all members. I give the commitment again that with Councillor Bowden and in the spokes meeting, we will continuously review how this is working, and we will continue to find ways of doing it as effectively as possible. But to indicate that this should go to a different committee of the council, we respectfully disagree with, because we think it's working well, but we can always do it better. Finally, I think the opposition and members of the public watching should notice that the vast majority of this governance review we are supporting today. There are many recommendations that we've looked at, listened to, and are adopting. The fact that we have these two slight differences from the team is completely normal, and I think should be seen in that spirit.
Thank you, Councillor Howard. Councillor Dr. van der Ven.
Thank you. Yes, I guess I would say that every committee at any council is a work in progress, and this one in particular, perhaps because of the integration of health and social care, both in government reforms and the integrated care system that we are a part of in a very new way, and our committee. And it is indeed an enormous brief, because health and social care is an enormous brief, and we weren't going to do it on day one. But I think it's an incredibly interesting, fascinating, compelling, challenging committee to be part of, and it is constantly building on learning as we go along. And the really big moment for us was the introduction of our new scrutiny officer, who is kindly here today, Rashenda Greenhill on the back. It's made an enormous, palpable difference already. We have support at, do we have 28 quarterly liaison meetings with our NHS partners every year? I think that's right. You know, we have the chance to participate 28 times a year in small
confidential meetings with, as trusted partners with the NHS. And my feeling is that that is where scrutiny is built. We can move things to a different day or to different part of the day or to reserve. I don't think that's the answer. That's shifting the deck chairs. I wouldn't think it's sensible to send anything back to Constitution and Ethics. I think they would probably be interested to ask us what's working. And finally, I thought the pre-scrutiny meeting that we had ahead of the April meeting was outstanding. We were all there, and I look forward to that continuing. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor du Preez.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make a few brief points. Firstly, this discussion today, these recommendations today, deal only with those elements of the governance review that require constitutional change. So if something is not in the recommendations, that does not mean that we are not doing it. It simply means that it is not something, not a recommendation from the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny that requires us to change the Constitution. So I just want to be clear on that point, that there are opportunities after this meeting to discuss matters that do not require such changes, but nonetheless, we hope will improve the way the council functions. The second point I wanted to make was that bringing together adults and health has not been easy, but it's been a real challenge, but it's been very important to do so. That is the direction of travel of discussion and debate nationally in these areas. And it's really important to consider all of those issues together and in the round. I would like to commend Councillor Howitt and Councillor Van der Ven for the hard work that they have put over the last 2 years in making that very difficult challenge something that has led to good discussions, good debate and good outcomes in terms of recommendations and decisions for the council and for the community. In particular, I want to reference a recent debate at Adults and Health on primary care. It was a scrutiny of primary care that I particularly requested that the committee should do following the local experience of our GP practice at Priorsfield in Sutton. And I came along to hear that meeting a month or so ago, a few weeks ago, in this room. And it was an incredibly useful and informative session. We drew a lot, well, the committee drew a lot of information out of the NHS officers who were present to answer the questions. There was a long list of matters that had been raised, discussed, and which the committee said, that the committee chair said that they would wish to return to. I thought that was an excellent piece of work. I'm really encouraged at the committee taking those pieces of work and running with them. The committee does a lot of work also outside formal committee meetings in terms of the liaison that it has with so many elements of NHS practice. That is a huge piece of work, and I stand to be corrected, but my understanding is that that is mostly done by members of the administration, members of the committee, and it would be good to see a lot more involvement across the authority in that very important ongoing liaison and scrutiny through that means too.
Thank you, Councillor du Preez. I have no other members indicating they wish to speak, so Councillor Bowden, you're up.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. Isn't it astonishing how the words in an independent report can be manipulated so as to produce almost the exact opposite of what was actually written in the report? The independent governance review actually suggested that there should be a change to the Constitution in relation to health scrutiny. Now, the fact that they proposed a change which isn't legal doesn't alter the fact that they proposed that there should be a change to the Constitution. And the reason that they proposed that there should be a change was that the current arrangements of the council don't give the capacity to fulfill our statutory health scrutiny function. And I can tell you, Chair, that in the last 2 years, there has been relatively little change in the way in which health scrutiny has actually been carried out in the council. Now, it's very easy from the inside not to have an objective view of these things. And I've been on the inside of this for the last 2 years and more. So I was interested to get an outside view. And the outside view was supplied to me unprompted, by the new appointee from Fenland District Council to the Health Scrutiny Committee, Dr. Haq Nawaz, who is a retired GP. So he comes along to his first meeting of the Health Scrutiny part of Adults and Health a few weeks ago. And afterwards he said to me, "Is that it?" He was appalled by the lack of opportunity for proper scrutiny, which our arrangements actually provided. So we've got an independent governance review which has recommended there be change to the Constitution. And this amendment doesn't say what that change should be, but gives the council, which effectively means the administration, the opportunity to consider that recommendation and to consider what could be improved. The suggestion that there is no constitutional change which can improve the current situation is insulting to the independent governance review, and it's also failing the residents of Cambridgeshire who deserve better. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bowden. Councillor Bird, as the original proposer, do you want to add anything?
No, thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. In which case, we will now move to an electronic vote on Councillor Count's amendment. Mrs. Rowe.
Members in favour of the amendment, please press the button underneath the word yes. Members against the amendment, please press the button underneath the word no. Members wishing to abstain, please press the button underneath the word abstain. Yeah, I'm now closing the vote. Yeah. Chair, the result of the vote is 25 votes in favour, 33 against and no abstentions. The amendment is therefore lost.
Thank you, Mrs. Rowe. We now move to the substantive item, which, just to refresh your memory, is the recommendations from the Constitution and Ethics Committee, with one amendment as a result of Councillor Dupre's amendment going through. Is there anybody who wishes to add anything further before I proceed to a vote, which I'm going to explain if there are no further speakers? Councillor Count.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The whole governance review was actually a very embarrassing moment for the council. We've spent the last 2 years as the opposition. From day one, we said the changes to committee structure meant there weren't enough committee meetings, there was not enough time for business, there's not enough attention to the public health scrutiny. In fact, everything that we said has come home to roost in this governance review, which is the vast majority of recommendations which this administration is going to go ahead with, except for the one that we've just lost, which is probably the biggest budget of all, and in terms of the county council spend, which is the adult social budget, and the biggest budget of them all across Cambridgeshire, which is the health budget. And to see the lack of scrutiny carry on because there is no constitutional change, because there's no desire on part of the administration, but simply to plod on with minor changes at ground level is quite disappointing. However, I'll move on to the other recommendation in the paper, which has nothing to do with the governance review whatsoever. And that is regarding the new CJAC committee. So the delegation of powers away from the county council to form a new joint committee with those residents of Cambridge City and the near environs to take on some of it was something under the last administration. We had, I think, 3 of them. 3 of them popped up over a period of time, and they were done away with because they didn't have the strategic view of the county council, and they were not functioning very well, and therefore it was dilution of powers of the county council to non-strategic bodies. Now we know of the congestion charge and the debacle that GPC is bringing forward across the their proposed SDC zone, the Cambridge City and South Cambs. And we know the objections of the public to that. And part of that, part of the making consultations commentary, making connections commentary that came out, and certainly on social media, was just what a complicated system we have in Cambridgeshire. We have the GPC, we have the CPCA, we have districts, we have counties. We have outside of Cambridge City, we have parishes and towns. Inside of Cambridge City, we have whatever passes for administration inside Cambridge City. It's not my area of expertise, but we have far too many layers. And yet here we are, the very people who complain about all those layers actually asking to introduce a CJAC back in. So that's recommendation, I think, 4. Whichever recommendation that is, Chair, I do not agree with it. It's bureaucracy, a spread of bureaucracy. And therefore I'll be voting against, and I ask you to take that recommendation separately. And because I cannot, and I don't believe any of us can agree with the fact that the public health functions in the way they are remains unchanged despite such a damning review from an independent expert on governance, I'd like that one to be taken separately as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Count. Councillor Bulat.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just interesting. I think that in the COSMIC committee, actually the decentralization paper, which included CJAC alongside all the other local projects, did pass with cross-party support, but perhaps there's like a split on CJAC. I won't comment on that one. I think I wanted to, after listening to this debate, I thought to say something positive about this paper, because I really welcome in the COSMIC amendments in terms of reference, the specific mentions to migrants and refugees and our work with migrants and refugees across the county. I think it's really important we have this in the terms of reference, because it does reflect our strategic approach and our work over the last couple of years, in particular, working on our county strategy, which was again supported at COSMIC, as well as the focus on inclusion. So that's why I'm really pleased that the title has stayed after Councillor Dupre's amendments. So I just wanted to say something positive, because I feel we need a bit more positivity in the debate as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bulat. We always welcome positivity. Councillor Dupre, take note. You're next.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. I don't know what you can possibly be referring to. I was pleased but somewhat surprised to hear the view expressed by the leader of the Conservative group that there were too many layers of local government, particularly considering that his party in government and locally introduced most of them. However, I want to refer specifically to the health recommendations because recommendation 7 contained 3 different aspects to it. Firstly, the governance and the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny did not recommend splitting adults and health, and I know that that was extremely disappointing to Councillor Count, who has made it his mission in life that that separation should take place. However, the 3 recommendations from the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny relating to the health function were, firstly, to move aspects of social care decision making to the New Communities Committee. Well, the recommendation didn't define what aspects those might be, and we struggled to see what they might be and how that might work. So we felt that that was not a recommendation we wished to pursue. The second recommendation was to move consideration of public health to the Health and Wellbeing Board, and officers, the Director of Public Health, made it extremely clear why that would not work and would be inappropriate. So we decided not to pursue that. The third one is to use reserved meetings of Adults and Health Committee to focus on scrutiny of health. And firstly, a lot of work has gone on by the Chair and Vice Chair of the Adults and Health Committee since the report was commissioned to streamline the way they work, and that I think is going well. But secondly, as I said earlier, that is not a matter for discussion today, because it is not a matter that requires constitutional change. I'm therefore struggling somewhat to see what it was that the Centre for Governance Scrutiny recommended that was firstly lawful and practicable, secondly, clear enough for us to do something about, and thirdly, a constitutional change that was something we should do today. There's nothing that complies with any of those criteria that we're not actually dealing with today. So I'm really struggling to see what that's all about, and I'm really pleased indeed to see the recommendations in front of us today, and whether they're voted together or separately, I shall be supporting all of them. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Netzinger.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lorna, for all the things that she has said, which I would also like to...
Through the chair, Councillor Netzinger, through the chair.
Through the chair, indeed. I would like to thank my colleague on my left. But actually, I stood up partly to say some of those things which I won't say because she said them better, but also to talk about CJAC. I think I am the only county councillor from Cambridge who has experience of CJAC as a county councillor. I was just thinking Jerry may have done. I'm wrong. I'm wrong.
Okay, everyone, focus on the chair.
I think for those of us who have worked with CJAC in the past, there is a very strong sense that it is something that is very useful in the Cambridge context. That has been a strong view from Cambridge for a long time. The fact that Cambridge is the one area of the county which is not parished may have something to do with that, but I think it is also partly because it is probably the most intensely, densely populated area of our county. And it is also somewhere where the traffic issues and the parking issues in particular have been stressful and difficult for many years. They're not necessarily any less stressful or difficult now than they have ever been. And the complex governance arrangements that were referred to by Councillor Count don't necessarily make that any easier. But the one thing that CJAC did in the past, and I hope will do in the future, is bring together councillors from across the district and the county to look at cross-boundary issues, and particularly my recollection is really complicated parking issues to do with residents' parking associations and residents' parking permits, which have quite a significant knock-on impact in neighbouring areas. There will also be other major issues because transport in Cambridge is changing quickly and is always controversial, and it will be very helpful for those of us operating in that well-argued space to be able to have this single place where those conversations can happen. So I just thought it was important to make it clear that this is something that has been wanted by Cambridge. It was valued by Cambridge in the past, and I'm sure it will continue to be useful and used. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Netzanger. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's important also to remember with CJAC that this is a pilot project. And the objection from Councillor Maguire, who obviously isn't here today, at the Constitution and Ethics Committee was that he was concerned that this would mean the district councils wouldn't play a role because they hadn't done last time. And of course, as Councillor Netzanger has pointed out, this is a pilot project in the city. And this is, of course, going to be a two-way street, if you like, two-way flow. There's going to be powers given to the city, and indeed the city will be supplying work and powers to the county council. So this is a two-way thing. And finally, I'm not sure what this GPC organisation that Councillor Count keeps pointing out, I think it's GCP, but I think we know what he's referring to. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that clarification, Councillor Sanderson. I have no other members who have indicated they wish to speak. I reserved my right to second. I have nothing to add. Councillor Bird, anything to add?
No, Chair.
Thank you very much. So we will proceed to a vote, and this is how it's going to work. I intend to take the agenda items for agenda item number 7, small 1, small 2, small 3, and small 5 all together, because nobody has spoken against them. Can I assume that the council meeting is in assent? Does anybody disagree with that? Good, so those are agreed. We move now to small 4, which is the establishment of a new Cambridge Joint Area Committee, and agree its terms of reference as attached at Appendix D. Mrs. Rowe, we shall move. We could do, oh, I'm looking at you, Councillor Count. I'm sensing that you may wish to vote against small 4 and small 6. Are you happy to do them both together? Yes? Okay. Mrs. Rowe, we are now going to take a vote on small 4 and small 6, and Mrs. Rowe will open the voting now.
Members in favour of recommendations 4 and 6, press the button underneath the word yes. Members against recommendations 4 and 6, press the button underneath the word no. Members wishing to abstain, please press the button underneath the word abstain. Is he not there? Okay. Chair, I'm now closing the vote.
Thank you, Mrs. Rowe. And the result is?
Chair, the result of the vote is 32 votes in favour, 25 against and no abstentions. The recommendations are therefore carried.
Thank you very much for that. We now move to agenda item number 8. So I move from the chair that the allocation of seats and substitutes on committees to political groups in accordance with the political balance rules as set out in the report be approved. And I invite the vice chair to second.
I second, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bird. We will now move to discussion. Everyone happy with that? There is no dissent. Does anybody disagree? Marvellous. We will take that motion then as carried. We move on to the next item, which is the appointment of the chairs and vice chairs of committees. Before I move that the proposed appointment of the chair and vice chair of committees as set out in the report be approved, I would like nominations for the chair and vice chair of the new Assets and Procurement Committee that we have just agreed. Councillor Netzinger.
I would like to nominate Councillor Hathorn as chair and Councillor Ray as vice chair of that committee.
Do you have a seconder? Councillor Machini.
Apologies, yes, I second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Okay, no discussion. Thank you very much. There is general consensus in support of that motion. Does anybody disagree? We will take that motion as carried. Thank you very much. We move on now to agenda item number 10, which is written motions, and 4 motions have been submitted. Before we move to the first motion submitted by Councillor Alex Bulat, and before I ask her to move and speak to her motion, I believe she is content to accept an amendment as an alteration. Can I confirm, Councillor Bulat, that that is the case?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I accept the amendment as an alteration so we can debate the substantive motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In that case, can I please ask for consent of the meeting, which will be signified without discussion? Are you in favour? Yes. Thank you very much. In which case we move on now to ask Councillor Bulat to move and speak to the altered motion, which is now the substantive motion.
Thank you, Chair. I first met the young farmers in person in October 2021. It was their annual general meeting in Islay, actually. And the county organizer told us later how she didn't often get to see councillors of any type, including county councillors, at their meetings. And she was expecting, and I quote, an older man called Alex to show up. So we laughed then, but it does tell you a little bit about stereotypes in local governments, doesn't it? On a serious note, the first issue raised with me by the then president was about skill shortages and the importance of vocational education in agriculture. And yes, the Brexit word was mentioned and immigration as well in that context. Since then, I have been attending regularly their board meetings at Home Farm in Huntingdonshire alongside other councillors. This has been a huge learning opportunity for me as I got to learn directly from county farm tenants just starting their businesses locally, from young people from farming families, and from the friends of young farmers, such as Farmer Luke from Finland, as he's known on TikTok, who does some great educational videos for young people, so check that out. I spoke about skills, we spoke about the impact of the climate crisis, about crime, and of course, the ever-present topic of highways, with Neil helping me out with some questions in one of the meetings. I wrote this motion based on feedback collected based on months of conversations with different young people. They are the future of farming in the county and the UK, and policy has to reflect their needs and their feedback. This motion recognizes the huge contribution that our Cambridgeshire farmers, including our county tenants, make to the economy as well as to local community through community wealth building and supporting our council's environmental aims. However, the picture across the UK looks very worrying for many farmers. Transport poverty is a real issue and particularly felt in counties like ours. There is a lot more to be done on skills regionally and nationally, both in terms of provision of pathways into farming, but also at a narrative level. We need more focus on vocational education, overall vocational skills, and to break the class ceiling in education. Farming needs soil scientists, but also needs fruit pickers, and all jobs need to be valuable in their different ways. But by far the greatest long-term threat is the impact of the climate crisis on farms. Our farmers are rightfully concerned about the impacts on soil, on water supply, natural pest control, just to name a few of the challenges. This motion commits the Council to some practical local level steps. Subject to procurement rules and potential future changes, it encourages the Council to source locally at least half of the food for our events and encourage our partners to do the same. This is a local measure we can take as a Council, which is good for our farmers and good for the environment. The motion confirms our support as a Council for the National Farmers Union Back British Farming campaign. It's really crucial for all of us as councillors to support this campaign, especially given the scale to which the UK's level of food sufficiency has been decreasing over the last decades, and support buying locally and our local farmers in our county. We also commit as a council to promote pathways for young people to start their business locally. The county farm team has already done some brilliant work on this, and I've been speaking to some of the officers, giving me the example of Zimbabwean David and Brenda Wanaka, I hope I pronounced this right, who started in Landbridge a few months ago, and their story was featured in various media sources and newsletters, and it was great to see how people coming as newcomers to the county can start a business here and be very successful. And of course, there's so many examples from our new county farm tenants. County councils should be in the news for stories like this, supporting new entrants into farming businesses, not for selling off farming estates like it sadly happens in many parts of the UK, not least due to the detrimental impact of ever-squeezed local authority budgets nationally. The motion is also asking the combined authority to include specific training to support and encourage future agriculture-related employment as an addition from Councillor Goldsack. Finally, as most good motions do, we're asking our chief executive to write yet another letter for the letter pile to the relevant ministers to call on protection of UK food standards, workers' rights in agriculture, and express concerns about labor shortages locally, and suggest to the relevant minister that maybe our post-Brexit immigration policy should be just a little bit more pragmatic for agriculture. I hope this motion can achieve cross-party support today, and I thank once again Councillor Goldsack for working with me on agreeing an amendment that could be accepted as an alteration to the motion, and for making some helpful suggestions that strengthen the motion. So I hope everyone can support this motion today, and thank you to Councillor Goldsack for seconding the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Boulat. Councillor Goldsack.
Yeah, I'll second the motion and reserve my right.
Thank you very much. I now open the debate. Who would like to go first? Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be relatively brief. I would also say I'm very happy to see that Mark has seconded the motion from Councillor Boulat. In the motion, it does reflect the fact that Brexit unfortunately has delivered three probably unexpected things for the farming industry. First of all, we have some food insecurity. We've seen empty supermarket shelves earlier on in this year. We've seen labour insecurity, and that was acknowledged in the motion, I think. And there's also income insecurity for our farmers in Cambridgeshire, because the replacement of the basic payment scheme with ELMS and SFI, unfortunately, has not gone particularly well. So in this environment, local self-sufficiency has become more important than ever, and the motion reflects that. Whilst we can never be 100% self-sufficient locally, Councillor Boulat's motion encourages us to seek opportunities for local sourcing, and we should really welcome that. Climate change and net zero is referred to in the motion. And of course, this is not an abstract concept. For example, we see last year, many potato growers in Cambridgeshire could only apply about 60% of the water they required to grow optimum crops because of water shortage. And of course, this is not the same as some of the crops being literally on fire, as we see at the moment in many of the European countries. The motion refers to trade agreements so far, and there has been some sacrifice of standards, not in every case, but certainly if we look at beef and sheep production, whereby different standards are allowed for imported Australian beef, and our own local production in Cambridgeshire is at a higher standard. Finally, the motion refers to labour supply, which, as we know, is a major issue for our community. We used to welcome thousands of young Europeans to help us to harvest crops, in particular vegetables, in Cambridgeshire. But they were made to feel unwelcome, and unfortunately they went home never to return to us. It's a wide-ranging motion addressing many areas, and I think it's very responsible to bring this forward to council, and taken as a whole, I think it's to be welcomed, and I do support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tierney.
Thank you, Chairman. I won't be supporting this motion. There's a lot in it that I like and I do support, but I found it a rather strange motion. Initially, it seems to try to tie together a number of vaguely related things as if they were one same thing when they aren't. Then it moves on to make a bunch of what I consider to be very wishy-washy suggestions that mostly achieve nothing. Let's try and do a bit more sourcing locally. Yeah, of course. Let's back British farmers. Of course. Let's look to bring young people up with a decent path into the career. Of course. The trouble for me is it then ties that to some things that I do not support. The primary one being net zero by 2045. I have never been and will never be a supporter of that, and will not vote for motions that bring it into it. So I wish it hadn't done that, because otherwise I could have supported it, even though in my view, it's mostly just virtue signalling and achieves next to nothing. The final result being write a letter, big deal. Thank you.
Depends what's in the letter, I suppose, Councillor Tierney. Councillor Daunton.
I support this motion. It's timely. In my own division of Fulbourn, which includes both urban and rural areas, edge of the city in Tevisham to 6 Mile Bottom and Quay, new, more sustainable approaches to farming and food production are being pursued. In part of my division, Little Wilbraham, I recently attended an afternoon of talks and farm visit, where we listened to presentations and saw demonstrations of the benefits of regenerative agriculture and wild farming in relation to local food production. These mean using the soil to best effect, mixing crops and livestock, thinking carefully about husbandry, and reducing significantly the reliance on pesticides. The farm in question has fields of bicropped weans, wheat and beans, and boats, barley and oats, as well as commercial grade wheat. The weans and boats ensure that the soil is nitrogen rich without synthetic amendments, and being no-till means that worms can continue to do their good work undisturbed. Rotation is also good for organic matter. This small local farming business is already practicing regenerative architecture and advocating wild farming. It is producing cereal crops that are to be milled and produced as food that can be recognized for its local origins. The wild farming movement itself is growing. This is a community of growers who support each other and drive innovation in techniques. There is better farm diversity and a much greater connection with bakers and supermarkets, so that consumers can know how the ingredients of the food purchased are grown and where. In the Wilbrahams, we can buy bread made from flour, made from wheat, grown in our community. I support the motion's call for local partnerships with farmers to improve knowledge of local food production and to help young people develop local businesses in local farming. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Shaler.
Thank you, Chair. In addition to some great feedback about Fen Roads, at a recent Cambridgeshire Young Farmers Association meeting, members said that they would like to see more farming content in our schools, in our curriculum. This is about retaining and teaching the culture and skills of farming. Thanks so much, Councillor Bulett, for bringing this motion. I do have some mixed feelings, however, about the solar farms. We clearly need sustainable, non-polluting energy. Perhaps canals and reservoirs could be covered with cells. We are slowly covering car parks and warehouses, for instance. In fact, all farming is solar farming. But when we move from photosynthesis to solar voltaics and the soil is covered over, it feels like a loss from the biosphere. It doesn't support traditional farming communities in the same way. It is sad and indicative, perhaps, of a broken system when harvesting energy is more profitable per hectare than harvesting food. In this country over the past 13 years, we have seen the rise of food insecurity. And as stated in the motion, falling food self-sufficiency. It is incredible that amidst massive price hikes for consumers, farming is becoming ever more marginal. For instance, the cost of irrigation water in the summer has skyrocketed, but farm gate prices have not. Our farmers not only contribute to the local, but also to the national economy. However, export numbers are down. I'm not saying that quitting our European single market could never have ended well, but this government's badly botched version of Brexit has made the UK the only country in the world to have effectively put trade sanctions on itself. This has left not only farmers, but most people worse off and falling further behind day by day. And the rising cost of finance might be good for bankers' profits, but it is not good for farming. As for our net zero policy, our lowland peat-based soils are phenomenally productive. Unfortunately, when they are turned over and tilled, the high carbon content is vulnerable to oxidation and lost to the atmosphere as CO2. In Cambridgeshire, transport accounts for 25% of our carbon emissions. Farming accounts for 40%. And most of this is from ploughing peat. For many root crops, there are no viable alternatives to ploughing. But this is not true for other crops. Direct drilling and less disruptive methods can build up rather than lose precious topsoil. We need to find ways to support rural communities and rural incomes with new methods and new crops. And in this, county farms can play a key role. With the combined authority mayor, we are also working to replace rural bus services lost due to an inefficient and expensive privatized provision model. Bus reform promises to expand services and connections to many currently living in transport poverty. Chair, as we have been reminded today, in this county, many of us are farmers. I want to thank you all for what you do, and I very much support this motion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair. I represent a largely rural division, and this motion reflects lots of the concerns I get from my many parish councils and parish councillors, many of whom are farmers. It seems to me at the moment that the UK farming industry is in the midst of several parallel crises, some of which still to arrive. Things like soil degradation, seasonal droughts and flooding, crop and livestock disease, and the risk to fuel and fertilizer supplies. All of those problems are going to be compounded by climate change and a rapidly expanding population, which is gobbling up the amount of high-grade arable farmland available and will further accelerate the decline of UK food sustainability. Solving those challenges will require innovation, education, and a steady supply of inspired young people ready to take up the challenge of sustainable food production. Unfortunately, you mentioned young farmers. In general, those people do not exist in large enough numbers because the immediate problem facing the industry is one of chronic labour shortage. I was absolutely shocked to discover that the average age of a farmer in the UK is 59, which means that many are ripe for retirement, and when they leave, they will take a lifetime of accumulated experience with them. Inflationary pressures and energy costs have squeezed margins to the extent that some of the crops are no longer economically viable and has accelerated the departure of experienced farmers from the industry. I spent this morning searching for agricultural courses in Cambridgeshire and was disappointed to find that other than a few level 1 BTECs in animal management, I could see nothing to tempt aspiring young farmers into Cambridgeshire. So we desperately need to attract more UK workers into agriculture, not just skilled professionals, but and all year round farmers, but also semi-skilled labourers and pickers. The summer before last, a report commissioned by the farming industry concluded that there were 500,000 vacancies from a workforce of 4.1 million. The principal issue here is, of course, Brexit and an immigration-unfriendly government. Less than 1% of seasonal workers in British farms are UK born, but there's also been a massive decline in the value of sterling compared with the euro, which means that for many immigrant seasonal workers, there are literally richer pickings elsewhere. A UK Parliament report found clear evidence that labour shortages have badly affected the food and farming industry, threatening food security, the welfare of animals and the mental health of those working in the sector. I think we've all experienced the empty shelves in supermarkets as a consequence of that. Last summer, the NFU estimated that £60 million of UK crops are left to rot, owing to a lack of workers and the reports of fully grown pigs being slaughtered and disposed of because of a lack of abattoir staff. Locally in Huntingdonshire, unfilled agricultural positions massively outstrip those from any other sector, including those from manufacturing, which is also in the midst of a skill crisis. And the key to solving all those problems is obviously education and innovation. We need to provide attractive educational vocational courses to inspire a generation of farmers to tackle the considerable challenges ahead and to prevent the further erosion of our food sustainability. I fully support this motion, especially the sections on improved education, and I think we have to support our rural communities even better. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Members, I have 7 more speakers, so please indicate if you want to speak, otherwise I will close the list. Councillor Hoy, you are next.
Sorry, see how long it's been since I've done this, to turn it on. So I've got a number of issues with this motion. First of all, regarding the point about Brexit. So welcoming Europeans, in my view, isn't the solution. And I know you might think, oh, typical Tory, you know, you're going to support Brexit. I didn't. I've said many times I voted Remain. I'm not. I wasn't a Brexiteer. But I've since come to learn that actually just importing people for cheaper wages is not the solution to the problem. It doesn't help. All it does is it drives down wage standards. It drives down employment standards. It doesn't help anyone at all. And I find it quite ironic, actually, that on the one hand, the joint administration say that they want a living wage and they want to pay people fairly, and then want to import a labour from abroad to work for poverty wages. So, you know, kind of a bit of contradiction in terms there. Now, I get why farmers have had to do that. I understand. And the main reason they've had to do that is because now, how do you compete with what is a global market? You know, how can you grow strawberries in the UK for as cheaply as people are importing them from Spain? And we're all guilty of that. I'm sure we've all got things in our fridges that didn't come from the UK. That's just the world we live in now. I think my colleague here was saying to me that they're importing eggs from Italy at 60 pence each. You know, how can people compete with that? So when it's cheaper to import food than it is to grow here, that's what we're going to continue to have these problems. And, you know, you all talk about climate friendly policies, but I don't see how it's climate friendly to be, you know, sending loads of food over in aeroplanes using a lot of CO2. I also think the other problem with this motion is it contradicts what the Joint Administration is doing elsewhere on other committees. So you say that you support farming, but due to the lack of weed killing policies, you've got ragwort growing everywhere, which I found out this morning kills horses. Farmers are up in arms about it. So that's a contradiction of, you know, words and not actions. And also you've all sat in many a meeting, and it's been mentioned again today about re-wetting the fens. We have got in the fens some of the best grade 1 agricultural land there is. The fens feed people. The food that is in your table and it goes on tables around the country is fed. And what you seem to be saying is that, and how I've read this policy, is you want to support British farmers in the sense that you want to do a motion and you want to write a letter and you want to say all the good things about supporting, but you want to flood their land for the climate crisis. You want to carry on importing food from abroad. You want to employ cheaper labour, and that's what you want to do, not actually provide real solutions other than write a letter. So I don't think I can support it, sadly.
Thank you, Councillor Hoy. Councillor du Preez.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank Councillors Bulat and Goldsack for working together on what I think is a very good motion and a very wide-ranging motion that covers issues including transport poverty, which is a real concern for many communities in Cambridgeshire, skills post-Brexit, and the climate challenge. I was delighted to chair the tenant farmers meeting at Quay earlier this year and to sense the very real enthusiasm among our tenant farmers for their work and for the contribution they make to the life of Cambridgeshire generally. We had an excellent presentation on regenerative farming, some lively discussion about carbon, and a real willingness and enthusiasm and desire to invite the council in to show us as decision makers what they were doing with our land, and that was a fantastic experience. And to see many of them now turning to social media and daily explaining to us what they do to ensure that that we and the nation are fed. I was also delighted to be at the Fenland Soil Conference in late April, a soil standing for sustainability, opportunity, innovation and learning, which was a very well attended and high energy event with not only national but international input. So there is so much going on in this sector, and it's really pleasing to see that recognised in this motion today, and to see members encouraging the sector and supporting it in this way. There are some things that aren't in this motion. There's no reference to peat, for example, which is a very significant issue. And the reference to solar doesn't really address the issue that we're all facing of the competing use of land, which is why I've been so enthusiastic that we should be, as this authority, part of the Food Farming and Countryside Commission's project looking at Cambridgeshire and how we address those many different ways in which land can be used and needs to be used. But you can't have everything in a motion. I'm absolutely delighted with the motion that's in front of us. I shall be very pleased indeed to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor du Preez. Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to say that I support this motion. I come from a family of farmers in Surrey and in Pembrokeshire, and I spent my working career in agriculture working in plant breeding. And we know that varieties that we breed in the UK are useful for those in Northern Europe, and likewise in reverse. Varieties of our agricultural crops that are produced and developed in Northern Europe are useful for us in the UK increasingly as the temperature increases. But all of that has relied on the easy and free exchange of material and staff between the UK and Europe. And that has become much more difficult since Brexit. All sorts of legislation to do with how seed may be moved around has become more difficult. It has affected the kind of work that I do. All of that has become more difficult. In addition, one of the other things that has been problematic is, as mentioned in the motion, the seasonal worker scheme. In my village, we have some very successful previously fruit farms which have used the seasonal labour scheme very successfully up until Brexit caused it to, as Councillor MacDonald has said, made the UK feel unwelcome to workers who came ever since the farm was established just after World War II. These different workers have come from our Eastern European countries regularly and easily and willingly and happily to work on our farms, where they've been extremely well supported by the farmers, and they have returned year after year. These are loyal workers who are happy to return until Brexit changed that. So I too would very much like to see a revision to the seasonal worker scheme. So what I wanted to point out was that this all, as others have said, this affects the amount of food that we can grow in the UK. And we so much need to have agriculture at the heart of our government's thinking. As others have said, also in my village is the Milton campus of the College of West Anglia, mainly based up at King's Lynn, but we also have a campus here. They used to run an agricultural course, but now it is, as Councillor Ferguson said, a very reduced course. And that's such a shame, because even the college farm premises are being sold off or being reduced. And that's such a shame, because local residents were using that as a way into agriculture. The other point is I'm really glad to hear that we have a local farmer in Land Beach who is growing African vegetables as a tenant farm on our farm and on our land. And I'm really glad that we're able to support that. He saw a corner in the market that wasn't being supplied, and so he is having a go at in a small way, growing new vegetables that actually might support changing climate considerably in future. So I'm supporting this motion absolutely, because it requires us to write to the Minister of State at the Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, because fundamentally, we need to bring agriculture to the core of this government's thinking, the importance of it, the value of it, and the key to our food sustainability and security. It's absolutely important that this government recognises the importance of our UK farmers. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. We need to support our local farmers, and I do welcome the comments about buying local. I do have some issues with some of the comments made around Brexit, because yes, it has had an effect on the labour market. But as one of my colleagues said, obviously what we don't want is a cheap labour market. We want people being paid a proper wage for what they're doing. We also have some grade 1 agricultural land that doesn't need a huge solar farm all over it. However, we do need to act in a positive manner in buying British. As Councillor Hoy has touched on, the example of supermarkets buying from all over the world food products to satisfy the consumer desire for any vegetable 365 days a year. Consumers do need to reduce the desire to have available every possible vegetable or fruit. We need to get back to eating more seasonal produce, which will reduce many carbon miles and hopefully supports our British farmers. And Councillor Bradnam mentions on that, yes, some farmers can start growing produce that is with the changing climate perhaps, which will, instead of importing them on planes coming in, that they will actually be produced here. But we as consumers need to act as well in terms of improving climate. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Count.
Thank you, Chair. When this motion was first put in front of me in its raw form, there was no chance of me supporting it whatsoever. It was primarily a political attack with not enough backing our farmers in there. And I'm glad of the excellent work that Councillor Goldsack alongside Councillor Boulat agreeing to has managed to get it into something that some people can support, whilst I can't support everything. So if I separate the rhetoric and the words out from the recommendations, do I actually think that we should be able to buy more locally? Yes, I do. Do I support National Farmers Union campaign, back British farming? Yes, I do. Do I want to promote education partners working with farmers to get better pathways, develop businesses? Yes, it should be happening anyway. Should our policies be more rural proofed? That's wonderful, that is. It's lovely to have something that isn't Cambridge-centric presented in front of us for me to support. Ask the combined authority to make up for their lack of effort so far in their future agricultural, agritech related deployment. Yes, great. Thank you very much for including that. One point of disagreement though, County Council, a good motion does not end up in writing a letter, as you seem to think. It is huge. I don't mind this letter, but a good County Council motion actually ends up with the County Council with its £500 million a year revenue budget or £2 billion a year capital budget actually doing something. You have a huge range of resources and services that you could change, adapt and mitigate. And that's where a good motion comes from, actually making a change to difference to things instead of writing a letter off to the minister of something or another that gets you an automatic reply from some junior person signed off, but actually it doesn't achieve change. So no, I don't disagree with this letter, but that is not the mark of a good motion. So I'll give you some examples of what we could do that would be actually make a good motion. We've got a 30,000 acre estate, and for 2 years, we have been banging on at the SNR committee about the lack of member oversight and lack of delivery there through the formal governance workshop, through the formal governance arrangements. There's been no reports on the farming, our farms estate come to the SNR committee, but it's all handled behind closed doors by a farmers working group, which probably, and I have no doubt does excellent work, but it's not in the public eye. The public is unaware of anything we're doing. I've brought up in the past our tenancy arrangements do not satisfy the climate change desires that you have for looking at longer term solutions, such as major reservoirs or solar farms, where a longer term view of investment may be made outside of the tenancy arrangements that are gone for at the moment. Now, I'm not a fan of growing energy supply feedstocks on agricultural land. This is known about me because I was quite vocal when we was talking about solar farms in the past. We will not use grade 1 agricultural land. And in fact, where we do put up solar farms, we'll encourage the use to rent out for sheep, etc. So it continues to have an agricultural use at the same time. Completely different, of course, the Liberal Democrats at South Camps, who've actually gone so far as to release Greenbelt for solar panels, which is, I can't say that I would have found a good use, an acceptable use of Greenbelt land. There's been a lot of talk in the rhetoric about the things that I don't agree with that aren't in the recommendations, but I'm going to talk about them. And I think Councillor Hoy absolutely nailed this on the head. I welcome the fact that this references the labour shortages in the agriculture industry. It's true, there's no doubt about it. This country survived on a labour that was very cheap at the time and managed to depress the country's wages nationally. It wasn't just in the agricultural sector. It was across the whole piece. When the Labour government was in and they had the open door policy, and wages such as plumbers, builders, etc., were kept artificially low by the extent of the labour immigration market, it had to change. And when you make that change, two things happen. There is a transitionary period, which is what we're going through now, and we hear about the steps that people are taking to cope with that. So, for example, we're adopting different food stocks that were actually growing in this country due to that, which require less labour but have higher value. The second is actually the agri-tech comes in and the actual machinery. So we now have, for example, machines that can pick strawberries at perfect ripeness rather than having labour. So it's the investment in the machinery and actually the raising of the wages for the people actually working on the land that is a benefit of Brexit and not actually the other end of the scope. And in terms of actually...
Thank you, Councillor Couch. Your time is up, I'm afraid. Thank you. Councillor Black.
Thank you, Chair. Can everybody hear me? No. Okay. I wonder if this might be one of our last discussions about rural affairs, if we're to listen to Government Minister Michael Gove, that we might be concreting a lot of this land over in the near future. With his ambitions for 250,000 houses, and which sits rather strangely with MP Anthony Brown saying that a council that wants to obey government instructions to put 50,000 houses in is somehow in the pocket of developers, I think was the phrase he used, which was rather strange. Anyway, I was provoked to speak on this really by the mentions of net zero from some councillors, and I feel these were really not positive interventions at all. And I think I'd like to say is I think when you look at the disbelief in the desirability of net zero that was expressed, and I think probably goes into a denial of climate change, I hope that would convince some people who might have voted against this motion that actually they should ignore such speakers and actually vote for it. I've had a lot of involvement in the industry of farming and so on, perhaps from my involvement in enforcing national minimum wage in my career. And I find it very strange to find a Conservative councillor who gets up and says, what we want is to improve wages. This is from a representative of a party which actually abolished the agricultural minimum wage. We used to have a higher wage by law for the agricultural sector, and the Conservative Party actually abolished that. And I very much support this motion. It's a motion that says a great deal about farmers, but I've always been very much concerned about farm workers as well. There's more farm workers than farmers, and that's even before you get to the situation we have in rural areas now, where many people are actually employed by gangmasters, not directly by farmers. I regret actually some of the amendments that were made to this motion, I would like it to still say austerity policies have left many in rural communities feeling abandoned. I think that's very true. That is what the government we have is in. And we've had a Tory government since 2010, remember. It is weird that you see members of the council from the Conservative Party saying that we're all in favour of higher wages. These wages in the countryside have been depressed on your watch. There's nobody else to blame. And when you look at the gangmaster system we have here, we need to be clear, this is not about just seasonal work, as it perhaps once was. It is throughout the agricultural sector. It also applies in all the little factories you see dotted around our countryside, processing plants. And if you go into those factories, the production lines, people are not employed by the owner of the factory, they are employed by gangmasters. And the situation there is grim, because if you manage to improve your terms and conditions or your wages there will be another gangmaster who comes along and says, well, I'll take over the contract and I'll do it for less. And it will depress the wages straight down to the rock bottom. So we have a grim situation in our countryside, and it is thanks to a Tory government. I mean, we would notice that the thing that saves it from being absolutely desperate is national minimum wage, which of course the Conservative Party voted against. And in rural areas, you can see on the in car parks and sometimes bus stations, even in the very early hours of the morning, far before there's any public transport, people waiting to be picked up by little white minibuses. And people are often left standing there with no work because there's no work to you today. It's the sort of thing that the trade union movement was trying to combat in the 19th century in places like the docks. So, you know, I'd like to say that we need to think about the agricultural workers as well. And the part of this motion, I would support this motion. I would particularly commend the instruction to say that we should be looking to protect the standards for and the protections for workers. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor King, you are the last speaker before I invite the seconder and the proposer.
Thank you very much, Chair. Kind of you to let me in. I've listened very carefully to the debate, and I think it was very good up until the last speaker when it descended into party politics, which is mostly very unfortunate, because this is a really serious matter, how we can do more for our agricultural industry. There are things I disagree with in the motion, but overall I am going to support it because I think there are more good things than bad things. And the key thing for me is to emphasize that we have to look at how we can facilitate people coming from abroad to do work that English people are unable to do. And I do use that word unable because we have an aging population, and a lot of work in agriculture is very physical, and people who are suffering from illness or disabilities are just not able to do that work. So I think we do need to make very clear to our government, Conservative government, that they need to look at this very carefully. The other thing that I think is really important is that we speak with a united voice on this. I represent a rural area, and I think that the people who farm and the people who are employed on farms, you know, would not thank me for voting against this, because it is an important non-political issue. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Goldsack, you reserved your right to speak ever such a long time ago.
It was some while ago, but thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much. It was a busy weekend, but it was a delightful weekend to achieve what we've achieved before you today. We started in one place and came to another. There's some notes I'm going to read from in a minute, but unfortunately, Councillor Count took my approach. The debate is a really good debate, and actually that was a good debate. I think we've had a good debate, open views. Let's try and focus and fix that which we can focus on and fix. We can't change the government. We can't change this. We can't change that, right? Some of you people in here want to be politicians. You are county council elected
councillors, be a county councillor, elected councillor. Okay, you can't change the union rules or this, that, and the other. So now to my actual speech. As a council, not only should we care about farming, we should show the community that we care about farming. With this motion, we have some very clear recommendations, 6 of them. I would urge you to read them, lose the rhetoric, read what we're asking in the 6 deliverables here, please. A definition of a farmer is a person outstanding in their field. You've probably heard that little pun before, and I like it, right? What we've got to do is find the next people to be outstanding in their field. And that is sadly lacking. One of our recommendations is that we call on the training and the support of those. I think it's Councillor Black mentioned that we've got to look after the farming communities. These are the next farming communities, the farm workers. Let's give them the skills and the knowledge that they need. It's been a pleasure to work with Councillor Boulat on this. Her passion has shone through and she's done it for the right reasons. Hear the tale of what she said. She attends local meetings of young farmers and speaks to farmers, okay? Ask yourselves, members sitting in the room, when did the last time you go to a young farmers meeting and listen to what's being said out there? Okay, it's a great point. It's a great message that why we were elected. And can I just remind you that Councillor Boulat is a Labour member in the city. She's not surrounded by green fields, like most of us, or like many of us, right? So I commend her for that, and it was good to work with her. I actually do commend this motion, and I hope that you can support it. I fully understand that we've given reasons, and there may be reasons in here that some of my colleagues have said that they can't support it, and I respect that. That's what debate is all about. We have 6 points on here that we're asking for. I would ask you before you vote to read those 6 again and look at yourselves and say, can I really say I can't support this? Just as Councillor Count actually stood up and said, that was my speech, you nicked there, but never mind. Left me exposed with 6 points, but they're all good points. They're all very, very good points. There's lots of reasons why. Some people think Brexit, some people think climate, some people think this, some people think combination of all of these things, right? So look at what we can do about them. And these are the 6 things we're asking you. So I'm very pleased to second the motion. Thank you for the opportunity, Councillor Boulat, and also thank you for the input, Councillor Ferguson, because I like the idea of asking the CPCA to focus on the training courses, and that was a welcome amendment. So thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goldsack. And lastly, Councillor Boulat.
Thank you. This was a very long, insightful and relatively cheerful debate compared to other debates we had. And if anything, it was worth having this motion on the agenda, if only for this debate, because we got to listen to so many different views and perspectives on a topic that many of our residents would feel it is important. So I hope all of our residents did enjoy the debate if they're listening in. Thank you again to Councillor Goldsack for seconding this. We'll probably win a prize for the most cross-party motions in council at some point. Thank you to Councillor MacDonald for the insight on the impact of Brexit, especially on labour shortages. I did see recently the government relaxing some of the rules in the construction industry, so I hope some rethink will follow in agriculture as well. Councillor Daunton, thank you for bringing your insight into your own division and successful examples of sustainable farming locally. Those are all very important for our debate. Councillor Shaler, thank you for joining one of the young farmers meeting to answer difficult questions on highways, and also highlighting the need for education, especially in schools on green jobs and different vocational paths. Councillor Ferguson, it's great to hear the views from parishes. I know you engage very well and effectively with all the parish council meetings in your area, and indeed the average age of farmers is 59, and that's what we need to focus on, skills and education like presented in this motion, so we can actually train people who are already in the UK in particular, so it's important to have this new generation of farmers. Councillor Dupre, it's good to hear the insight from the tenants farming farmers meetings as well. Councillor Brandon, thank you for supporting as well. It's always great to hear your experience working in agriculture and highlighting some of the challenges with the seasonal worker scheme, which I do agree with. Councillor Sharp, thank you for your balanced view, especially around the point of buying seasonally in the UK, which I fully support. I think it's an addition to kind of the local, supporting local products. Councillor Black, really interesting insight from her previous work enforcing minimum wage. I'll get to that in a second. Councillor King, thank you for supporting this. I do agree, actually, we have to have a united voice on this cross-party. And thank you as well for your balanced view on immigration policy. I think we just do need to see the reality sometimes and like make sure we have a pragmatic way to deal with the realities in front of us in terms of the skill shortages. Councillor Hoy, I do agree with you that relying on immigration alone isn't the solution. And that's why I think the focus on education in the motion and opportunities for young people is really important and has been highlighted by Councillor Goldsack as well. I do feel that if we're like kind of blaming immigration for homegrown problems like low wages, low pay, and not respecting workers' rights, we do need to equally campaign for proper workers' rights. And most importantly, and this relates to Councillor Black's points, the enforcement of minimum wage and living wage. And the last time I checked, the Labour Abuse Authority is quite underfunded in the UK. So maybe that's another letter to government. Just kidding. Councillor Count, I am having like about 2 minutes. So I can't argue on every single point, but I do think that Brexit and immigration policy is not just rhetoric. There are some economic facts that are impacting our agricultural sector. So we do need to, I mean, I just tempted to say like look beyond the rhetoric, but I think we do need to accept that there are some impacts. However we voted or whatever we thought on those issues, we just have to look at the situation in front of us to say how do we deal with this locally. I was actually trying to lighten up the speech a little bit so I don't make it entirely depressing by mentioning that every good motion ends with a letter. I do think the key point and the key takeaway is what Councillor Goldsack has been saying around education, around local supply, around encouraging local products. So those are the substantial recommendations for me, but equally this doesn't mean we can't ask our government for more, even if we operate at the local level. And it's very interesting that Councillor Count actually agrees that writing to government ministers often doesn't really go anywhere. So I think perhaps there's something that needs to change about government. So I guess on workers' rights enforcement, I guess I'll see you all on the picket line campaigning for better workers' rights and protections and enforcement of minimum and living wage. Finally, and I saved the best last, Councillor Tierney, I'm really sorry you don't support our council's priorities towards net zero. Of course, it's it's your personal view, like I respect that. But of course, this was also done under the previous administration. So I think it's like a bit difficult politically in any party not to support that at the moment. I was really quite surprised that even when we have a cross-party motion and opposition members saying we need to be a united voice on this, I'm still get accused of virtue signaling. And I guess there is no escape from those compliments as long as I'm on the left of politics. Thank you.
Very good timing, Councillor Boulat. Right, members, I am now going to move to an electronic vote on the motion. Mrs. Rowe, could you please start the vote?
Members in favour of the motion, please press the button underneath the word yes. Members against the motion, please press the button underneath the word no. Members wishing to abstain, please press the button underneath the word abstain. I'm now closing the vote. Chair, the result of the vote is 53 votes in favour, 3 against, no abstentions. The motion is therefore carried.
Thank you, Mrs. Rowe. It is now.
Sorry, Chair, my mistake. 2 abstentions. Sorry, but the motion is still carried.
Yes, thank you. It is now 12:28 and we are required to have a break at 12:30. So I suggest that we resume at 1 o'clock. Well, I'm not suggesting it. We'll resume at 1 o'clock.
over here at the same time and discussing something.
Right, colleagues, shall we make a start? If I could ask you all to take your seats, please. Where, I wonder, is Councillor Count? And Councillor Goldsack, come to that. I'm going to wait for a moment or two for Councillor Count out of courtesy. None of these are council account. Councillor Milnes. Right, members, we now move to the second motion submitted by Councillor Lorna Dupre. Can I ask Councillor Dupre to move and speak to a motion as set out on pages 5 and 6 of the council agenda? Councillor Dupre.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move this motion, and Councillor Sanderson will be seconding. This motion arises from provisions in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, which envisages, among its many other provisions, a single consistent system to replace the current Section 106 and SIL developer contributions. The government maintains that the new system will be more efficient, more transparent, and more consistent. Affordable homes, infrastructure and services are vitally important to our communities, and developer contributions are a big part of that picture. In 2018-19, that was some £7 billion in total. It's recognised that there are problems with the present system, but last month, a letter to Michael Gove urging him not to proceed with these proposals was signed by around 30 signatories, including the Royal Town Planning Institute, East of England Local Government Association, the County Councils Network and the District Councils Network, and the Federation of Master Builders and Shelter. And once you get 30 signatories of that range and diversity signed up to say they want you not to do something, you should really realise that it's something you should probably not do. The signatories say that these proposals could mean fewer affordable homes and less money for other significant infrastructure. Their view is that it will make it harder, not easier, to secure contributions, that local authorities will need to forward fund improvements in infrastructure with no guarantee that the development value will actually be realised. More types of infrastructure will be eligible, and so the resulting developer contribution will be spread more thinly. The system will be more complex and will need to align with local plans, which may also present its own difficulties. And the change will cause prolonged uncertainty and upheaval at a time when our priority really is to be building homes. There's a particular problem for two-tier authorities balancing the affordable housing, which will be the district's main interest, with the bigger infrastructure that is the responsibility of the upper-tier authorities. And that will be even more so for three-tier areas such as ourselves, with the combined authority on top of 2 tiers of local government below it. The bill would require councils to draw up infrastructure delivery strategies, but these would be done by districts, not by the county. So here in Cambridgeshire, there would be no statutory role in that process for Cambridgeshire County Council, and that would bring its own risks also. This motion, therefore, calls on this council to formally endorse the representations of the County Council network and support the other signatories to this letter, to offer to join with other authorities to work with DLUC to create a set of improvements to developer contribution systems that actually works, to ask DLUC to undertake further research into that, and indeed to offer as a uniquely 3-tier authority to be part of that process, and also to ensure that the combined authority is engaged too with that discussion. I therefore call on members to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dupre. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to second Councillor Dupre's motion. And undoubtedly, the SIL system needs to be reviewed and changed. In addition to what we've already heard from Councillor Dupre, we must also take note that the proposals from the government aim to reduce the number of Section 106 agreements, and with that, the time taken for negotiation. And of course, there's not any clear answer or any one standard approach which will fit all areas, types of development or scale of development. The ability for a local authority to be able to use the most appropriate route way to ensure that a high quality scheme is brought forward with associated infrastructure delivered in a timely manner will be key. And this must also take into account wider elements such as the design of infrastructure and ambitions for net zero carbon infrastructure, which could have a significant impact on the gross development value or GDV of a site. So whilst a high quality development and piece of infrastructure has clear benefits to a locality, it's important that the cost of this quality design is balanced against the impact. And this will also come down to how costs are factored into considerations in determining how infrastructure levy rates are set. I think the levy should capture value uplift associated with permitted development rights that create new dwellings. Such developments will have their own associated infrastructure needs, which otherwise will not be met through the levy. And I disagree with the suggestion in the government review and consultation that levy should be charged on final sale of a scheme. It's unclear to me what is defined as final and how this applies to the various scales of development, from minor developments to large scale phased ones over multiple years. So whilst the principle is understood, the process is making a relatively simple approach much more complex. It's unclear how the ability for assumptions that support calculation of values could not be further manipulated without clear definitions and parameters of development to which it would apply. I do also have concerns about the ability for local authorities to set stepped levy rates, especially with the very limited information offered by the government. If the levy is in place, the full rate should apply. It's unlikely to increase infrastructure funding available to support our development needs, which are so vital. So the government also stated that the levy will result in affordable housing levels that equal or exceed the level of affordable housing provided through developer contributions during a previous time period, which is going to be specified in the regulations. But it's unclear how this will be calculated. And whilst it's understood that the infrastructure levy will increase from the community infrastructure levy, it's still uncertain if infrastructure levy will increase from the current CIL and 106, so the financial and non-financial contributions combined. And I think this needs to be very carefully considered, recognizing that under the current system, large-scale major development sites rarely deliver policy compliant affordable housing due to frequent viability challenges. So whilst I think it's important to balance what a developer when the developer needs to pay the levy, at present requirement to pay at commencement has worked well, and there are no regulations in place for where it does not. And of course, developers factor in this payment, other costs and taxes, for example, in their assessment of the scheme when they pay for the land and do their risk returns. And under CIL, the regulations allow for payment instalment policy to be adopted, which has been done by many local authorities already, taking into account a balanced approach. And finally, Chairman, I disagree with the proposal that we can borrow against infrastructure levy proceeds, or local authorities can. Indeed, as stated in the proposals and stated in Councillor Dupree's motion, the funding via the existing or proposed route is not enough to cover all the infrastructure needs, and it cannot fall at the feet of local authorities to cover this gap. So I'm very supportive of Councillor Dupree's motion, and I wish her well and wish the council well when they submit this to the Department of Levelling Up. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. So the debate is now open. Who'd like to go first? Councillor Count.
Thank you, Chairman. Going to go straight to the recommendations here and ignore much of the rhetoric, as I did on the earlier motion. That doesn't devalue any of the rhetoric. By that, I don't mean that it's just simply talking for talking's sake, although a lot of this is. What I mean is I'm separating out what the council is being asked to do, which is actually what we vote on. We don't vote on all the words that go beforehand, we vote on the recommendations. And the recommendations start with a letter, as they do again, as we heard from somebody. All good motions carry a letter. whether they have an effect or not, but there we go, it's got a letter. But this letter is unique because what it does is we're asked to endorse the County Council Networks letter that we are a member of, and therefore we endorse anyway. So let's go out there, let's repeat what we're already doing. In fact, this council has already made representations to the consultation itself without going through the full council process, covering all the points about the county council's lack of engagement in the Section 106 agreements being a statutory body. Anyway, so there we are. We're going to be asked to endorse a letter that we're part of a body that we've endorsed already. We're endorsing a letter that whilst having written one ourselves already. We're offering to join other local authorities in working with the Department for Levelling Up, which other local authorities are already doing. And this is very much about planning anyway. And we're asking the government to carry out further research, which we've already asked them to thoroughly test the pilots anyway. So in terms of recommendations here, it's let's do what we're already doing. Let's do what other people that we encourage to do are doing, and let's do more of it. So I don't really have much time for those, because whilst I might agree with them, I do not like having this council's time wasted in this manner of repetition of something that's already gone. There is one at the end, however, that is missing. Provide the CPCA with a copy of the letter for their awareness. Well, to save this full council time, could I suggest that the chief executive, if he's so happy, emails the letter that the consultation response that the county council has already submitted, and save this full council the time and temerity of a motion on repetitive stuff. Moving aside from the motions, I'd just like to comment on a couple of things. We need more housing. The country needs more housing. There's no doubt about that. As part of that, we need more affordable housing. And unfortunately, what we see is every time an attempt to change any part of the system that is not functioning well goes forward by this government, then the normal people stand up and say there's something wrong with it, delay, and try and get in the way. Well, delay won't work because we really need that housing now. What we don't need is just putting stuff in the way to try and stop it. There is a real problem with viability abuse, which is one of the key things that's attempted to resolve here. Cambridge City is a prime example, and you should be aware of this. Cambridge City is a prime example where houses have been built on viability assessments that have gone through, subsequently sold at 50%, 60%, 70% more than the value that was used for their viability assessment. And this could be used to close that loophole. So please don't get in the way of this. Ask for us, which you've already done, to be involved in those conversations, but don't actually introduce delay. We need change, and we actually need it now. And by the way, if you actually want to go ahead with this, then feel free to write that email to Chief Executive with or without the full council getting involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Count. Anybody else? Councillor Tierney.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm unsure how I feel about this issue, so I'm listening to the debate to draw a conclusion. But I was struck by Councillor Dupre's comments about if enough people of significance sign a petition, then perhaps you shouldn't do it. And I just thought either she doesn't really believe that, or none of the people in Cambridge who oppose the congestion charge are significant. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tierney. Anybody else? In which case, if not, Councillor Dupre.
Thank you very much, Chair. Where to start? I'm going to start by thanking Councillor Sanderson for laying out clearly what the aim of all this is and where this is falling short, and raising the concerns that he has. He's absolutely right that this needs careful consideration. Councillor Count, I'm somewhat confused as to whether he's opposing this but will be supporting it because the other local authorities, including ourselves, do, or whether he's against it but will be supporting it, or indeed whether he's in favour of it but he will be voting against. That was an interesting one to unpick, and I guess only
point of personal clarification.
Will tell.
Thank you, Councillor Count. I was going to say we'll find out in due course, but as you have risen.
Well, seeing as Councillor Dupre is so confused on the matter, I'll clarify the matter for her, which is what this point is for. I'll be voting against this because you're simply duplicating work that's already gone on. I was pretty clear on that, and I don't like my time being wasted.
Thank you, Councillor Count. Councillor Dupre, if you'd like to continue, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. That speech in place of the earlier one would have saved us all a lot of time. Yes, indeed, we have at officer level made representations on this matter, but I make no apology whatsoever for bringing this before members today. It's important to bring this into the arena of elected politicians because it absolutely affects what we will be able to deliver for our communities if this goes through, and that is of fundamental importance. The motion also in its recommendations positively puts forward Cambridgeshire as a particular case, being a mayoral combined authority with a two-tier system underneath it for particular attention by DLUHC, and I would very much hope that they would pick that up, although the point has already been made that yes, letters to ministers can have fairly limited effect if ministers don't actually bother to respond to them. As for Councillor Tierney, I can't even remember what he said, but I don't think it particularly required a response of any particular significance or content, so I won't. But I really would encourage members to support this. If you're going to vote against it, despite the fact that the body of which we are members has supported it, then just because you don't think it ought to be discussed here today, I really think that that is quite an extraordinary basis on which to decide how to take a vote.
Thank you, Councillor Dupre. If I can remind members that the monitoring officer does screen every motion, and if it relates to business of the council, it is appropriate and acceptable to come forward as a motion. I have no other speakers, and I'm now going to move to the vote. Mrs. Rowe, could you please start the electronic vote?
Members in favour of the motion, please press the button underneath the word yes. Members against the motion, please press the button underneath the word no. Members wishing to abstain, please press the button underneath the word abstain. I'm now closing the vote. Chair, the result of the vote is 33 votes in favour, 19 against and 2 abstentions. The motion is therefore carried.
Thank you, Mrs. Rowe. That concludes discussion of the second motion. We now move to the third motion submitted by Councillor Atkins. Can I ask Councillor Atkins, please, to move and speak to his motion as set out on pages 6 to 8 of the council agenda? Councillor Atkins.
Thank you, Chair. Members, I would like to move this motion on school uniform costs. As the summer break draws near, many of us will be looking forward to a period of holiday and rest. However, for some families, the summer is a period of difficult financial challenges, including childcare, the cost of travel, and somewhat surprisingly, the topic of this motion, school uniforms. Now, one of the consequences of a period of poor economic performance is the way it exposes practices which developed during better times to tougher conditions. And make no doubt about it, these are very tough conditions we are experiencing right now. Wages have fallen in real terms by 5% since March of last year, completely eroding 4 years of pretty meagre growth in pay. Families of school children are facing a huge squeeze on their income from increased rent payments, mortgage payments, cost of food, utilities, and just about everything else as well. Now, it's in this context that there's been increasing national concern about the seemingly benign topic of school uniforms. Schools have very broad discretion in the uniform they specify to attend school, and particularly with many schools converting to academies, in the last 10 years, many schools have changed their uniform from the jumpers and so on badges, perhaps, that I was familiar with, to blazers, ties, and equivalent, to be sourced from a single contracted supplier. Combined with the overall inflation in clothing costs, the result has been a dramatic increase in the costs of school uniform. A survey by the Children's Society suggests costs of over £400 per year for secondary school children, for example. These are costs that some families in our county can ill afford. It's important to say here that I'm well aware of the huge range of pressures and expectations that our society places on schools. It seems to be an accepted philosophy of the last 25 years that any problems or issues with children or childhood in our society are for schools to solve. I'm quite frankly in awe of the range of provision, support and care that our schools deliver. But nevertheless, I was concerned by reports that despite the new legislation referenced in this motion, parents are still finding the need to spend huge amounts of money to send their child to school with the correct uniform. And I think it's just possible that some governing bodies perhaps have not fully appreciated the extent of the problem, or in fact the ease of the remedy. My initial research on secondary schools in our county suggests a growing divergence between schools who are, to be blunt, taking this seriously, and those that seem out of step with the recent guidance. For example, one school in our county states in their policy for this year, we will be changing our uniform requirements to keep the cost as low as possible. And they've duly removed the need for several branded items. Meanwhile, another school not far away still requires branded football socks, along with 5 other items of branded uniform. Now, without wishing to engage in some great debate as the overall merits of uniform, I think a branded sock is unlikely to offer good value for money in improving behavior, attendance, or a sense of ethos. Fewer than half of the schools that I looked at signposted second-hand alternatives on their website, as they're required to by the guidance, and nearly all of them gave the biggest priority on their website to the link to their sole supplier's online store, rather than perhaps considering how to help parents acquire uniform in a sustainable way. As the County Council, we have an important role in ensuring that our school governing bodies meet statutory guidance and also connecting them to the communities that they serve. I'm aware that many members here today do this very directly by serving as school governors, and we're all very grateful for the work that you and your fellow governors do. Although uniforms may seem like a trivial issue, I can assure you it's having a real impact on the lives of many families. And yet the changes that parents seek from schools would be pretty inexpensive and effective. Simpler uniform policies, getting rid of some of those branded items, clearer communication and guidance and alternatives, and an overall sensitivity to the costs that school policies impose on families. There is already best practice out there, but it needs spreading to all of our schools, and that is right and properly our role as the County Council to do. The actions proposed in this motion will help us systematically assess the extent of the problem in our county and help governing bodies understand what is required by new legislation and how they can better meet the needs of their communities. I ask that you give this motion your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Atkins. Do you have a seconder?
Thank you, Chair. I do second.
Councillor Taylor, and are you reserving your right to speak?
I'll speak now. Yeah.
You'll speak now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. In November 2021, the government issued statutory guidance on the cost of uniforms and expectations that the cost of school uniform is reasonable and secures the best value for money. The motion will help highlight the role around ensuring schools and the governing bodies are aware of the guidance. I can certainly remember, as Councillor Atkins said, we would only purchase it from one supplier. The guidance states that the single supplier contract should be avoided unless regular tending competitions are run before one supplier can compete for the contract. So basically, we're looking at the best value for money is secured. Within the guidance, there are many points which could keep the costs of the uniform down. We have seen in the briefing paper to the motion, there has been a 51% increase in the number of pupils eligible for free school meals between January 2020 and January 23. That's with 18,764 children now eligible. Increase shows how important it is to use other means of keeping the cost of uniform down. Some suggestions are sewn on badges. I do remember these at school. Less branded items, and of course, second-hand uniforms, which should be made available. This is also the good option for the environment too. We see too often uniform changes. Either school changes names, I think the school my children went to have changed their names twice. Yeah, uniform 3 times. While the latter years can keep the old uniform, year 7, 8 and 9 will have to pay out for new uniform. One element of this is, although not part of this debate, is that school uniform attracts a 20% VAT rate. This has little regard to the fact that children develop at different rates, and some under the age of 14 will need older age clothes. So say a 12-year-old may have to buy age 14 clothes, and this will be subjected to 20% VAT. A public petition has started with over 24,000 signatures to make school uniform VAT exempt. HM Treasury, in response to the petition on the 3rd of April, stated in the last sentence, "We keep all taxes under review, but we have no plans to change the VAT treatment of school uniforms." I understand that isn't part of the motion, but it is something that I would like members to be made aware of, and hope the government will review the VAT on school uniforms so that it will make it fairer for all ages. Although within this proposal, there is a written letter email contained, this is a very important part of the motion, because as I said, it will highlight to the governing bodies and the schools this crucial statutory guidance. There will also be within this motion data gathered and analysed. So I hope that you can all support this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Goodliffe.
Thank you, Chair. Back in 2014, the Children's Society, led by young people, brought a campaign to cut uniform costs. The young people themselves brought this campaign after seeing their fellow students having to sit out of class or being sent home from school with incorrect uniform. This was incorrect uniform due to financial issues rather than behavioural reasons. They felt this added to cost pressures for families and penalised those who were already struggling. In 2015, the government promised to cut costs. In 2020, a bill finally came to make schools prioritise their costs when setting a uniform policy. And as has been demonstrated earlier by Councillor Atkins, costs across our county and across the region vary hugely. Some of our schools are showing how well they can prioritise uniform costs and support parents with second-hand uniform availability and reducing the need for branded items. This motion seeks to ensure that this is managed by schools across the region and across the country. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hunt.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Atkins. We don't know each other, but I think it's a good idea that you've brought this to the council's attention. Looking at you, I think you may have more contact with consumers of uniforms at the moment than perhaps I might currently have. But anyway, I think it highlights the cost and in some cases the inconsideration of the authorities who make the rules for some of these branded products. I would like to say I have been a parent and I've faced exactly this problem, but fortunately my children didn't go to a school that was an academy or anything of that nature. Anyway, what happened there was, and I go back a few years, is a school blazer cost £100, and the second-hand shop would sell it for £10. It is a fact that children grow up very quickly when they're at secondary school. I mean, they grow out of uniforms before they wear out. And my experience was you buy a new blazer and the child comes home in the evening either with somebody else's or they've already had a fight and they've gone through the elbows. So, you know, buying a brand new one isn't a sensible thing. So although I support exactly what's going on and what's being proposed today, reluctantly, I feel we should encourage schools to go down the second-hand shop route. Parents have got old uniforms that are perfectly usable for another year or another 2 years. It can refund some of the money to parents because the schools, shops sell at a massive discount. And I think it's something which should be looked at alongside of Councillor Atkins' proposals. It's not in the proposals this afternoon. Councillor Coates will probably be able to advise people of the second-hand shop syndrome. He was a teacher at the school my son and daughter went to, so he'll know about it. It gets run, that the shops get run by parents who are enthusiastic about it. They only need to be open a few hours every week. And there's an answer there of keeping the compliance with school uniforms, but doing it at a much, much greater reduced cost. So I would like the council to consider that as an option to encourage. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Councillor Hoy.
Yeah, I'm going to sound like a real meanie now, but I think you should always say what you think. So I'm not going to vote against this because I guess for me, the worry would be if a child does go to school in the wrong uniform because the parents, for multiple reasons, maybe can't afford it, maybe don't care, maybe didn't read the policy, whatever, and they were bullied, that would be absolutely awful because it's horrible. Kids are absolutely awful creatures, to be honest, sometimes, and can be very unpleasant if you go to school in the wrong uniform or the incorrect uniform or not exactly the right thing or don't look exactly right. And so I would absolutely hate to see any child bullied for that. So of course I'll be supporting this motion. The only sort of two concerns I have with it, I suppose, is I had a conversation back when Wendy Ogle-Wellborn was the Children's Services Director about policies such as this and other policies that we have enacted. For example, we're constantly giving out now free food, free activities, and yes, it's great to do things for children, but if you give out too much, then it's very difficult to see, especially for early help and social care, the difference between parents that are struggling and unable to help and parents not wanting and physically not wanting to, or there being a social care issue. So I suppose it's about finding that balance and working out. And so does this mask that? I'm not sure. And the final thing was, which is going to be an unpopular thing, but it is what I believe. The only problem I have with things where we constantly are giving parents things all the time. Yes, there are parents in need. Yes, there are people struggling, but at no point do we ever talk about personal responsibility. Number of people that I speak to aren't having children at the moment because they can't afford it. And they're saying, you know, we are making a conscious decision not to start a family because of the financial issues. But we are saying that people can just constantly have child after child, and not think about the financial impacts. Yes, they are really expensive. Like everybody knows that they cost you loads and loads of money. So people should recognise that and make conscious thought before deciding what to do.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Hoy. Of course, it's not just children that can be horrid. Councillor Tierney.
Timely calling me then. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. First of all, what an absolutely fantastic motion. A breath of fresh air for me, this one. I think it's great for a number of reasons. First of all, it correctly identified a problem that real families are facing every day. I've experienced it myself. When my son was growing up, he's obviously an adult now, but when he was growing up, I remember having to change uniforms every 3 months at one point when he went through a growth spurt, and you need like 19 different items to match the school's current criteria. It's very expensive. So absolutely identified a real issue. It's really within the county council's remit. Schools, education, families, of course it is. The proposals made are sensible. He didn't attempt to give money away that no one has or to blame anyone. He simply made common sense suggestions for things that we could encourage that would help. I think I'd have gone a bit further and told schools we'd really like to see them offer more than one supplier, because then you introduce competition and that brings prices down. And perhaps even the schools themselves could offer a second-hand option for children that wanted to go that route, although there is some stigma to second-hand clothes, I know, perhaps incorrectly. And then finally, it was all done very non-politically, very common sense. It's really refreshing to have one that I can get so completely behind. So thank you to the councillor who brought the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Tierney. Councillor Hoy, if you could switch your microphone off, please. Councillor Hathorn.
So I also support this motion, and I think the debate has been great so far, and then many of the points that I wanted to say have already been said. I don't have a county-wide view, but I have a view of the schools in my division. because my children attend many of them, and they are, or have attended, and they are great, and they're doing a really good job. They have pragmatic, sensible uniform choices. There are some branded items, but I agree, it does get complicated, because I was thinking, when I went to school, it was a relatively relaxed uniform policy. It was navy and white, and there wasn't really a second-hand market for it. What I actually find at the secondary school and at the primary schools is that there isn't really any resale value in a polo shirt with Impington Village College on. I can't go on eBay and get my money back. So the best thing to do with it is donate it into the school parent-teacher association sale. And then so there is, and that's what everyone does. And there is this thriving economy. I don't recognise there being any stigma about second-hand uniform. My children wear it, perhaps I'm doing them a massive disservice, but all the parents I know seem to do it. We all attend the sales. And another really good thing about the parent-teacher sales is that it provides a resource of second-hand uniform that the parent-teacher associations are really happy to let those parents who are really struggling to clothe their children use. And that's not just a sort of lip service, aren't we doing a nice thing? When you ask the school office, they say, yeah, we do have parents come and take advantage of it. So I think it's really complicated. I think it's not straightforward. But I recognise that some schools are really expensive. This is about getting the data, taking stock and hearing those different viewpoints and encouraging schools to have a thoughtful approach to uniform that they can justify. So yes, I think it's a great motion.
Thank you for that. Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Atkins, for bringing this. Yeah, fully support it. A couple of things I'd like to say. Your recommendations are all completely supportable, but I would like to see a recommendation on there on time when we expect to see it come back. We have a legacy of an awful lot of stuff that's sat in the ether and we don't get answers for it. So we can do that. But just one thing I wanted to add, I'm very proud to be the chairman of Sarntown Rangers Football Club. We have a very large youth section that serves circa 500 people. And what they do this time of year is they have a boot project where players from last season that have grown out of their boots bring their boots. So if you're under 14 last season and then you're under 15, you might want to get, you may have parents who can go and buy new boots. Well, they're about £100 minimum for a good set of football boots. Okay, so actually we do a boot amnesty and they can come in. And what that means is those that can't afford the boots, there's always spare boots that they can get boots and still look and wear the branded boots that these kids wear. And maybe the schools can adopt that kind of approach as well. It's a very simple process and it works. So I'd just like to add that to you and commend you on the motion. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be relatively brief. I support the motion, as is in my interests declared. I'm chair of governors at a secondary school, which is part of a trust, and also governor at a primary school. We do, at the secondary school especially, we do use we call it pre-loved clothing, very, very much. There is a lot of use of that. And we certainly have reduced the number of branded products. And also by having standard trousers and skirts, this sort of area, which is not branded, that means people, parents can go to more multiple retailers. So, and certainly I've responded to concerns from parents about the uniform policies, which is making it easier. And obviously by adopting the government's recommendations, which is certainly hopefully reducing the cost, because as we've been said, it is a huge burden in the current, in any climate, uniforms, and as Councillor Goldsack, they grow out of things very, very quickly. So I do support the motion, and because it's obviously good to reduce the cost for parents.
Thank you. Councillor Netzinger.
I'm wondering whether I need to speak at all, given all the
You don't have to, Councillor Netzinger. I encourage this point of view to all members.
I should probably sit down. So having been a governor of a school in Cambridgeshire for 14 years and a parent at schools in Cambridgeshire for 16 years, there are two very quick points I want to make. One is that over the course of that time, the amount of school uniform that people are expected to buy has increased absolutely enormously. I don't think it has had any impact on the quality of education that those children are getting. The other thing I wanted to say was that the school at which I'm a governor has no uniform, and it is also a very good school. There have been battles at that school over the years with some parents trying to demand that there is uniform. Actually, there's a huge amount to be said for not having any at all, and I'd like to encourage more of our schools, particularly our primary schools, to look at that as an option. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Netzinger. Councillor Atkins, you are now in a position to sum up. You seem to have the chamber behind you, so don't say anything to ruin that.
Thank you for those wise words, Chair. I'll just quickly sum up a few points, if I may. I'm conscious I've spoken today whilst wearing a jacket and tie. I did pause this morning at my wardrobe, but rest assured it was out of choice, not pressure. And yesterday I did some excellent work whilst wearing a t-shirt and shorts, so I'm perfectly happy working across the spectrum there. Councillor Taylor, thank you for seconding the motion and explaining some of the issues parents face, particularly when they change name. I think there have been some really kind of poor practice in some areas there, and the cost that parents have faced, and also reminding us of the mess that is the VAT regime in this area. Councillor Goodliff, thank you for your support and reminding us just how long parents have waited for this. Thank you, Councillor Hunt, for your support and also highlighting the importance of second-hand availability, as many others did. I didn't want to be too prescriptive in this motion because I think schools are already tackling this in a range of ways. I think Councillor Hathorn mentioned some of the work done by her school, and Councillor Goldsack a similar situation. They just need to be doing something consciously and making it easy for parents to access, I think, is the message we want to be giving at this point. And as we get data back, we can refine that. Councillor Hoy, I'll return to in a moment, as is only right. Councillor Goldsack, your point as to the timings, I'm confident that this will be actioned swiftly, and I will of course follow this up via the action log if necessary. There have been some very helpful experiences shared by Councillor Sharp and Councillor Netzinger flying the banner of no uniform at all. Councillor Hoy, your comments were very interesting, and I don't want to dismiss them. I think that reducing the costs of uniform, I think, will benefit families right across the spectrum. So both those perhaps in receipt of public funds, and maybe those who I know are a particular concern of yours, who are perhaps just above the threshold for receiving support from the state. They will benefit too, I think, from more sensible uniform policies, as will those with more means. But I suppose we can let them have that. I don't particularly want to engage too far with the issue of deciding whether or not to have children on a kind of financial basis. I would just say that for my own part, I think the cost is genuinely surprising. I think even people who are pretty aware of the challenges that they might face might well be caught out or surprised by the expectations of schools. And it has also changed quite rapidly in quite a short space of time. It's not inconceivable that parents perhaps who decided to have children 10 years ago, even by the time they've got to secondary school, the situation, has changed completely. And so I think it's reasonable to say that these costs are out of line with what people might naturally expect, and that there's room here for us to have a role and have a voice in bringing this matter to a happier place. I think I'll leave it there. Thank you all very much for your comments and for the debate.
Thank you, Councillor Atkins. There seems to be general consensus in support of the motion. If anyone disagrees, could you please raise your hand now? There being no dissent, I think we will take the motion as carried. Thank you very much. That concludes discussion of the third motion. We now move to the fourth motion submitted by Councillor Bryony Goodliff. Can I ask Councillor Goodliff to move and speak to a motion as set out on pages 8 to 10 of the council agenda? Councillor Goodliff.
Thank you. Apologies, first of all, for the lack of a letter in this motion, but please feel free to write to your local early years settings to show your thanks and appreciation for all their work and dedication in this area. A key priority for Cambridgeshire County Council and priority of the staff who work in early years across this county is to accelerate the achievement of those children with the lowest educational performance so that the gap between them and those with the highest performance closes. Evidence shows that good quality early years education and childcare provision makes a significant contribution to a child's attainment and future life chances. This authority is committed, therefore, to securing and maintaining sufficient high quality early years and childcare provision to meet the current and future needs of Cambridgeshire's families. Early years are absolutely key in terms of performance, in terms of importance. Children's brains develop connections faster in the first 5 years than at any other time in our lives, and high quality educational experiences can produce great learning benefits for children in the long term. I must start by thanking government for preempting this motion by uplifting the funding for 2-year-olds by £2 an hour. Whilst this is welcome, this widens the gap between the 3- and 4-year-old funding to almost £3 difference, and the increase of 4 pence per hour for pupil premium children is, yes. Current average funding per pupil is 5,800 in primary school, 6,600 in secondary schools, but just 4,600 for early years pupils. In the sector, we're facing a recruitment crisis. Increasing funded hours for children sounds great until we look at the funding issues. Across the country, staff either cannot be afforded or even be recruited when there are funds available. Pay in the sector is incredibly low. LGA figures show that 45% of childcare workers claim state benefits, effectively subsidising the low paid staff. This is a gender issue. 96% of the early years workforce are female, and when families cannot afford fees, it is almost always the mother who does not or delays a return to work. Pay does not reflect the high levels of workload or responsibilities. Why would people choose to work in a sector being responsible for the safety of infants and children, their development, their education, their health and well-being, over better pay for far less responsibility in other jobs? Their work needs to be viewed as invaluable and specialised, reflected in pay, which makes early years careers both attractive and affordable. This would engender a workforce who is motivated and enable a clear career progression route, giving high quality early years education. The government plan for early years doesn't focus on careers or professional development. It refers to the child carer ratio and wants more children to be looked after by fewer staff. Decreasing this ratio means that staff will be less able to give high levels of individualised supervision needed by babies and young children to enable them to feel secure and able to learn. Staff will be pushed further from being able to know a child as an individual, recognising their likes and dislikes, their needs and uniqueness. This would have a detrimental effect on their social and emotional development. Staff have indicated that the activities they are able to offer may need to be changed and adapted if ratios were to change. Leaders have repeatedly told government that they would not lower numbers as it would have a significant effect on the quality of provision, on the workload and on safety. The sector is rightly worried about the effect of these changes on the recruitment crisis and the levels of burnout and job satisfaction issues already seen. How can more hours be offered without first fixing the recruitment issue? Rates paid by government to cover the poorest children are insufficient to meet costs in order to stay afloat, with many settings needing to top up costs with charges for private or paid childcare. Currently, many nurseries subsidise the government rate by their other charges for additional hours. The increase in funded hours will reduce the ability of settings to balance their books and may well lead to further closures. Settings are already being lost. National Day Nurseries Association's data shows a 50% increase in closures in 2022, backed up by Ofsted statistics. And there are not currently enough childcare places in England to deliver the government's plans. This policy will not reduce inequality. Early indicators point to fewer families on lower income being able to access nursery places if their children are not prioritised. Government's own figures show a £1.8 billion shortfall in the 3 to 4 year offer as it currently stands, before the ongoing issues with inflation and recruitment are taken into account. And round Europe warns changes risk widening gaps in child development and worsening in quality of provision. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Goodliffe. Have you a seconder? Councillor Boulat, would you like to speak now or reserve your right to speak?
I will second the motion and reserve my right to speak, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The debate now is on. Who would like to speak first? Councillor Count.
Yes, I won't take very long. It's there's a lot of good stuff in this motion. There's a lot of stuff that I don't agree with, particularly pointing fingers at austerity and the government. However, all of this is rescued by the final recommendation, which actually talks about producing a report to the CYP committee with specific regard to policy changes, etc. Now, at the very end of that, it says, with a focus on the county's disadvantaged areas, children and families. I think this is important enough for me to ignore any misgivings I have with the rest of the agenda. Whatever funding you have, whatever results you get from all the changes that you introduce, the fact that you're willing to produce a report focusing on those areas means a lot to me, and therefore I'm going to support that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Count. Do I have any other speakers? In which case, Councillor Boulat.
Thank you, and it's really surprising and great to see cross-party support on this one as well. I'll just say a few words about the motion. I'm really pleased to second this motion, calling for a much-needed better start for our children in Cambridgeshire. The UK, I want to make this point because the UK has a decreasing birth rate and we have an aging population which will be supported by an ever smaller workforce if we don't sort out the policies on childcare and supporting families and have family-focused policies currently. I hear this speaking to friends, my friends who are in their late 20s, early 30s now, and so many of young people I know do struggle with staying in work and making ends meet if they have small children in particular. And this has, as Councillor Goodleaf has pointed out, disproportionate effect on women and their employment. And those of us who don't have children, like me and my partner, are delaying starting a family, and the cost of childcare is a main consideration. It's sad to see so many young couples who perhaps 10, 20 years ago would have afforded to start a family who cannot because the ever-rising cost of living crisis, as well as the cost of childcare in particular. Like Councillor Goodleaf, I'm really concerned about the impact of early years policies, particularly on families on lower incomes, and how those recent policy changes would affect that, and how can we as a council support lower income families in general with the cost of childcare. I want to make this point as well because I'm really concerned about the impact of national policies, in particular on our maintained nursery schools. And I want to give an example of how important our maintained nursery schools are in the early years sector. The other week, I was, as I usually am, on the CT3 bus route in Cambridge, and a parent recognized me on the bus as the local councillor, so started speaking about a range of issues, yes, potholes included, but also early years provision. And she was telling me about her child who has SEND needs and how much they struggled to find early years provision that would actually support those particular needs. And this is unfortunately a familiar story for so many parents across the county, especially those who have children with SEND needs. She finally found the support in our maintained nursery school locally in Abbey, where we actually have specialized staff that can offer the particular support required for that child. And she told me how her child doesn't want to leave the nursery now at the end of the day, and that's how much he enjoys it. And that's, I guess, the picture that I want to see for every single child in Cambridgeshire, of actually not wanting to leave school or nursery because they enjoy it so much and their needs are fully supported there. We cannot afford more closures of earlier settings, so government needs to act to fund the early years properly and sort out, as pointed by Councillor Goodleaf, the recruitment and retention crisis in the education sector more broadly, but particularly in early years. So I'm pleased this motion has cross-party support. Thank you, Councillor Goodleaf, for putting forward this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Boulat. And finally, Councillor Goodleaf.
Thank you, Chair. The effects of this policy on SEND could be multifaceted. Children who need additional support will be vying for attention with more children. Staff are less able to identify issues and needs and tailor an early approach. Where early years identification of issues works well, and we can provide early intervention and vastly improve outcomes for a child and their family and enable a more successful educational experience, this may be detrimental through this policy. Ratio change and the devaluing of staff in the sector will be hugely detrimental. This motion calls on the council to continue to work with the sector and calls on the government to value the essential work of this sector for our youngest, to fund it properly, ensure qualifications are valued, encouraged and essential, and to work with those in the sector to continue to ensure our children can thrive and learn, particularly those with SEND or those in poverty. In the last 3 years, the number of 3- and 4-year-olds with an educational health care plan rose by 1/3, coinciding with a reduction of staff with at least a level 3 qualification and a rise in those with no qualifications. Parents with SEND often or sometimes struggle to find a local setting who is willing to accept and able to take their child. I've spoken with parents, teachers, nursery staff and managers across the county, as well as childminders. Across the board, there is a real fear that yet again, early years is seen as childcare, allowing parents to work, babysitting, and generally underappreciated and underfunded. Quotes included chronic underfunding, relentless staff shortages, and the pandemic impact. One childminder said they wanted to leave as soon as possible. They were waiting only until their child had reached school age. This childminder is a qualified teacher and early years specialist. They worked in foundation stage, then ran a preschool, moving to childminding, and are now desperate to leave the sector. They love being with the children, but the demands and the undervaluing has gone on for so long that this is just another brilliant professional who can no longer work in a sector where they're treated so poorly and valued so little. This motion asks government to equip professionals so that the early years education is able to bring social mobility, to deliver for children, and to turn the tide of the recruitment crisis, as well as being able to impact the less advantaged, those with additional needs, and equip future generations. I thank Councillor Camp for his words. I've always shown in my work in children and young people I will work cross-county, and though it's not always noticed, I do consider the disadvantaged areas of the whole county in everything that the Children and Young People Committee do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goodliff. Now, there seems to be a general consensus in support of this motion. If anyone disagrees, please indicate. You disagree? Okay, we will then in that case proceed to an electronic vote on the motion. Mrs. Rowe, if you'd be kind. Try again.
Members in favour of the motion, please press the button underneath the word yes. Members against the motion, please press the button underneath the word no. Members wishing to abstain. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Shall we let Mrs.
We're just resetting the vote and we'll take it again. Yes, and it was all going so well. Yeah. Members in favour of the motion, please press the button underneath the word yes. Members against the motion, please press the button underneath the word no. Members wishing to abstain, please press the button underneath the word abstain. I'm now closing the vote. The result of the vote is 51 votes in favour, 2 votes against, 1 abstention. The motion is therefore carried.
Thank you, Mrs. Rowe. That concludes discussion of the motions. We move on to the next item, which we consider is 11A, as set out on the agenda, the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority and Overview and Scrutiny Committee oral questions, dealt with in accordance with the protocol set out in Annex 1 of Part 4.1 Council Procedure Rules of the Council's Constitution. Can I remind you that councillors may ask questions for response by the council's appointee on the Combined Authority and its appointees to the Combined Authority Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which relate to the decisions of the Combined Authority Board and Overview and Scrutiny Committee as set out in the generic report provided. The generic report summarising the decisions made by the Combined Authorities formal committees is included on the council agenda on pages 47 to 57. Could you please raise your hand if you wish to ask a question of Councillor Netzinger, the council's appointee on the board? You'll have 2 minutes in which to ask a question and 1 for a supplementary with up to maximum of 2 minutes for a direct oral response. Who have I got first? Councillor Hoy.
Thank you. So this relates to Appendix 4. It was the Combined Authority meeting on the 31st of May. So there was considerable debate before it was resolved to defer this item to a future meeting. And in that debate, Councillor Netzinger expressed a dissatisfaction with the deferment, which was forced by a potential veto by Peterborough City Council. Councillor Netzinger expressed her support for the tabled local transport connectivity plan, even though it specifically called for a number of things. So for example, it called for the CPCA to develop and implement 20-minute neighbourhoods, to have demand management for cars through pricing strategies and physical measures, tackling private vehicle use, road space reallocation, fiscal measures such as parking charges, congestion charges, emissions charges and workplace parking levies to manage demand and or generate revenue, and to encourage road capacity reduction, leading to motor traffic disappearance and promoting alternatives to car ownership. So my question is, when did this council agree to a war on motorists? Why did Councillor Netzinger support congestion charges in light of the hated congestion charge in Cambridge? Thank you.
Councillor Netzinger.
So I would just like to make it clear that I don't think anybody is declaring war on motorists. I drive, I think probably most of the people in this room drive. I don't think that the transport and connectivity plan, which did not come to the combined authority, had any intention of declaring a war on motorists either. And I think it's extremely important that that is made clear, not only to members in this room, but also to members of the public. I do also, however, think, and I know that this is not agreed with by many members in Fenland, that we are facing a climate crisis, and that we have large parts of the world where it is extremely difficult to go out in the middle of the day at the moment, where people are dying. I think we need to look at how we are moving people around, particularly in Cambridgeshire, where not only is transport one of the biggest contributors to climate change, to our greenhouse gas emissions, but also where our extreme car dependency means that many people, often young people for whom driving is extortionately expensive, but also often older people, are trapped in villages where they cannot access healthcare, they cannot access work or education. And I think that those facts are really important for us to consider in our transport and connectivity policy. And I am not ashamed of taking into account the wider transport policy that we need. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hoy, you have the opportunity for a supplementary question, up to a minute.
Thanks for that clarification. I think we'll have to agree to disagree regarding the war on motorists, but it was good to, your reasoning was for the climate crisis. So that answers the first point, but you didn't answer the second point about why you voted for congestion charging when you know how unpopular it has been in Cambridge.
Thank you, Councillor Hoy.
I'd like to make it clear I have not voted on anything because the transport and connectivity thing was withdrawn. So I think that that part of the question was not relevant.
Right, thank you, Councillor Netzinger. I noticed that all of the previous speakers are named as me, so I imagine I'm going to get it in the neck if I step out of Shire Hall. Who else would like to ask Councillor Netzinger a question? In which case, we now move on to invite you to raise your hand if you wish to ask a question of Councillors Atkins and Goldsack, who are the council's appointees on the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Again, you have 2 minutes in which to ask a question and 1 for a supplementary. Anyone? No. Marvellous. We move on then to the next item, which is written questions. No questions were notified by the deadline, so that concludes the business on the agenda for today. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for your contributions, and have a safe journey home.
Yeah.